You begin on the surface where the world feels familiar. Leaves, roots, stones, the soft crumble of soil beneath your toes. Maybe you picture the quiet of a forest at dusk, the kind of stillness that makes you instinctively lower your voice, even when no one else is around. In that twilight quiet, you notice the things anyone might notice: a mushroom pushing through the leaf litter, a toadstool leaning at an angle, a dusty puffball waiting for a curious tap. Small things, ordinary things, the sorts of creatures you walk past without a second thought. So before we continue, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss a single revelation as this story unfolds moment by moment in real time. Tell me in the comments where you're watching, from what time it is there, and whether you believe we're hearing the whole truth about what's unfolding above our heads. And if you want to keep the signal alive, share this video on X, Facebook, Reddit, or even just with the people who still look up at night. You are the reason we can keep following the impossible, and for that, thank you. And yet tonight, you're invited to pause, to linger, to take a gentle breath and soften your gaze, letting the edges of things blur. Because beneath your feet, just inches below the ground, you trust to hold you lies a world that is neither plant nor animal, neither rooted like a tree nor wandering like a deer. A kingdom ancient enough to have survived every mass extinction Earth has ever thrown at it. A kingdom older than flowers, older than forests, older than bones, fungi. The name feels familiar, almost casual, like a neighbour you wave to but never really speak with. But what lives beneath the forest floor is no casual neighbour. It is a civilization vast, quiet and intricate. And the tiny mushrooms you see here and there are not that civilization. They're only the rooftops, the chimneys, the brief and delicate signs that something else is alive down below. Something older than your imagination is used to reaching for. You kneel down, brushing aside a thin layer of leaves. Even without touching it, the soil seems to hum with hidden life. If you could shrink yourself down to the scale of a beetle and tunnel through the earth, with its tiny precision, you would enter a realm woven of threads, fine, white, branching threads that move through soil the way water moves through a sponge. These threads are mycelium, the true body of the fungus. The mushroom above is just the fruit it sends up when the time is right, and already the narrative you thought you knew begins to shift. Mushrooms aren't plants. They don't collect sunlight the way leaves do. They can't stand up straight and harvest energy from the sky. They don't store water in thick stems or unfurl petals toward the sun. They also aren't animals, though in some ways their needs align more closely with ours. They must eat. Not in the way that implies teeth and mouths and motion, but by dissolving the world around them into digestible fragments, the way a soft rain dissolves chalk. If plants make their food from sunlight, fungi earn theirs from darkness. They secrete enzymes into the soil, turning leaf litter into a broth of nutrients, unlocking molecules trapped in wood or bark or a fallen branch. Everything that once lived becomes, through their patient chemistry, something usable again. In this sense, fungi are the quiet recyclers of Earth, the workers who ensure that nothing remains locked in place forever. They are the reason forests don't drown in centuries of fallen leaves, the reason nutrients circle back into new life instead of becoming trapped in the past. And though we can describe them scientifically, kingdom fungi distinct from plantae and animalia, these classifications feel somehow too stiff, too narrow for a group of organisms that defy boundaries so elegantly. They engineer soil, carry messages, digest rock and maintain forests. They form partnerships without eyes, alliances without language and decisions without brains. They behave in ways that seem more coordinated than chaos should allow, yet more mysterious than logic easily explains. Still kneeling, you bring your hand closer to the soil, almost as if expecting it to pulse. Part of you imagines a hidden glow like embers smouldering just out of sight. But fungi don't rely on spectacle. Their power is subtle, woven into processes so fundamental that you rarely think about them. And yet if they vanished, the world you know would collapse. Forests would choke under their own weight. Nutrients would stop cycling. Entire ecosystems would starve. Humanity would follow. This, you realize, is not some minor kingdom tucked into a forgotten corner of biology. This is one of the great engines of life. And still the soil is quiet, completely quiet. The quiet of something so familiar you forget to see it. The quiet of something that has perfected the art of existing without demanding your attention. When you stand up again, you look at the forest differently. The mushrooms no longer seem like decorations sprinkled on the ground. They seem like messages from below. Like brief whispers from something that prefers the shadows, something that builds immense ancient structures beneath every step you take. Tonight, you'll follow those whispers downward, gently, slowly letting the hidden kingdom rise in your imagination as you descend into it. You don't need to move your body, you don't need a lantern, all you need is curiosity drifting softly at the edge of sleep. Because beneath your feet, the world is larger than you thought, older than you thought, stranger and more connected than anyone ever told you, and the journey has only just begun. If you return to that mushroom on the forest floor, the one you almost stepped over without noticing, you can see it now for what it truly is: not a whole organism, but a fleeting gesture, a punctuation mark, a message from something far larger, far older, and far more patient than the delicate cap and stem would ever suggest. Think of an apple, bright, crisp, fragrant. But no one believes an apple is the tree. Everyone understands that the tree is the vast woody branching architecture beneath and above the fruit, the roots twisting through soil, the trunk rising upward, the canopy reaching for the sky. The apple is temporary, the tree is enduring. A mushroom is the apple, the fungus is the tree. But unlike trees, fungal trees aren't built of wood and sap. They're woven of threads so fine they blur the boundary between living tissue and mist. These threads mycelium branch outward, endlessly splitting, rejoining, curving around stones, sliding between soil grains, creeping into cracks in fallen logs, dissolving their way through leaf litter. Each filament is called a hypha, and each hypha is only a few thousandths of a millimeter wide. You could lay dozens of them across a single human hair, yet in their sheer number, in their persistence, in their branching geometry, they form networks that rival the scale of forests themselves. Imagine for a moment peeling back the forest floor like the page of a book. Beneath the leaves lies a pale, shimmering web, not unlike frost etched across a window pane. It spreads outward in every direction, so vast that even if you traced it with your fingers for hours, you would never find an edge. This web is alive. It grows, retracts, senses, digests, communicates. It stores memory and chemical gradients. It navigates obstacles the way rivers navigate mountains, slowly, patiently, inevitably. And most of the time, no part of it ever breaks the surface. Most of the time, the fungus lives and works unseen, flowing through wood, the way veins run through flesh, even though the material it builds with is lighter, thinner, almost ephemeral. The mushroom you see is the reproductive moment, a brief biological flash, allowing spores to escape into the air. It is the equivalent of a fruit ripening just long enough to spread seeds, then vanishing again. If you see a dozen mushrooms scattered across a clearing, you might assume a dozen individuals, but you could be wrong by several orders of magnitude. Those 12 mushrooms might all belong to a single mycelial network beneath the soil, a single organism spreading silently in every direction, as wide as a meadow, as heavy as a bear, as old as the forest itself. The forest floor is full of such illusions. What looks like a cluster is often just a gathering of fruit from the same subterranean body. What appears separate is deeply connected. What appears small can be unimaginably large, and what appears temporary is usually the most long-lasting organism in the system. If you could see through the soil right now, you might discover that the mushroom you noticed at your feet is only one outpost of a fungal empire extending far beyond the reach of your vision. One tendril infiltrates a fallen branch, slowly softening its fibers. Another threads around the roots of a young sapling. Another snakes toward the decaying trunk of a birch. The organism is not confined to one place, it is everywhere at once, a quiet explorer always pushing into new territory. And the fruiting body, the mushroom, is not its center, but its fleeting whisper. Its momentary attempt at connection with the atmosphere above. It might appear once a year, once every few years, or only when rain and temperature align in a way the fungus interprets as now. The rest of the time it is invisible by choice, conserving energy, investing in the underground network that sustains it through seasons of drought, cold, or competition. When the moment is right, the fungus inflates a knob of cells with water pushing upward like a fist through soil. What emerges looks delicate, smooth, pale, almost fragile, but it is powered by an organism that may be as wide as a forest, a creature that has survived storms, fires, droughts, and the long memory of winter after winter after winter. As you kneel again and brush your fingertips across the cap of that mushroom, you might feel a subtle shift in perspective. This fragile thing is not the fungus's weakness. It is its boldness, its declaration. The quiet underground being that usually keeps to itself has chosen just for a moment to step into the open world. One cap, One stem, one glimpse. Everything else remains below, woven through soil and roots and shadows alive in ways that don't need to be seen to be real. And in that realization you begin to understand mushrooms are the exception, not the rule. The iceberg is beneath your feet. What you see is only the smallest fraction of what exists. If you linger a little longer with that imagined cross-section of soil beneath your feet, if you picture that pale, branching lace of mycelium, not as a blur of threads, but as a living infrastructure, you begin to notice something surprising. The network is not chaotic. It's not a random tangle like roots of a pulled weed or a pile of tangled string. It has order, direction, purpose. It looks in a strange and quiet way designed. Not designed by an engineer, but by a billion years of refinement. You follow one high-fell thread as it curves around a pebble, meets another, fuses seamlessly, then splits into three more, like a branching highway system, like subway lines beneath a sprawling city. Mycelium does not simply grow outward, it builds roots. It maps the soil. It senses where nutrients are plentiful, where moisture pools, where roots are clustered, where decay is fresh. It reroutes itself when obstacles appear. It chooses efficiency the way rivers choose downhill. And this is where the story of fungi meets the story of forests. Because the mycelium weaving through the soil is not alone. It intersects with thousands of fine plant roots, not in passing, but in partnership. At these junctions, plant and fungus exchange what each cannot easily gather on its own. The tree offers sugar crafted from sunlight and carbon dioxide. The fungus offers minerals and water gathered molecule by molecule from soil particles too small for roots to penetrate. Most plants are not just connected to fungi, they are dependent on them. Once a root becomes wrapped in fungal filaments, the transformation begins. The fungus doesn't stop at one root. It extends onward, joining that root to another root from another plant, then another, then another. Soon, the trees that appear separate above ground are linked by a web so intricate that it begins to feel less like soil and more like circuitry. A mature forest is not a collection of individuals, it is a network. Researchers describe this vast underground mesh as the wood wide web, a term that began as a metaphor and quickly proved to be literal. Through fungal connections, trees trade resources with a fluidity that seems almost altruistic, though in truth it is a kind of biological economics and marketplace of molecules. A tall tree in full sunlight may send surplus sugars through the fungal network to shaded saplings below. Not because it is compassionate, but because a thriving forest is a stable forest, less vulnerable to wind-throw pests and fire. And the fungus benefits too when trees live the fungus eats. Meanwhile, when one tree senses an insect attack, a sudden bite on its leaves, a pattern of damage that signals a coming swarm, it releases chemical warnings into its roots. These messages travel through the mycelial networks faster than soil alone could carry them. Neighboring trees receiving the signal begin to increase their defensive chemicals, bitter compounds that make insects hesitate, toxins that make larvae struggle, sense that summon predators of the invaders. This is communication not conscious but effective. The forest is warning itself, and the fungi act as the wires that carry the message. If this seems too coordinated for organisms without brains, consider what coordination really means. It does not require intention, it requires feedback, exchange, a system in which signals travel and responses follow. Trees and fungi have built such a system through millions of years of unbroken partnership, each reinforcing the other's survival. What you see above ground, trunks, branches, leaves, are just the visible modules, the interface, the surface world architecture. The real conversation is happening below in silence so complete it borders on the profound. But perhaps the most astonishing revelation is this: the network is selective. Trees connected through fungi can recognize their own seedlings. They preferentially send nutrients to their kin. They support their young in the darkness beneath the canopy, feeding them until they can rise into enough light to make their own sugars. In this dim underground world, family trees are literal. Imagine that a mother tree feeding her children through a fungal web. And somewhere in that same forest, an old tree nearing the end of its life may begin exporting its stored carbon, its final inheritance, into the network, distributing it to neighbors before it falls. Even in death, it leaves a contribution behind, absorbed by the threads that run beneath, circulating through the community. This is not sentimentality, this is ecology. But the effect is no less beautiful for being practical. When you walk through the forest now, and perhaps after hearing this, the next time you truly do, you might feel the ground as something more than earth. It is a fabric, a woven consciousness, a shared body of relationships knit together by threads, thinner than hair but strong enough to bind entire ecosystems. Above ground trees seem solitary. Below ground, they are intimate. You are walking on a living network, a web of quiet collaboration that turns competition into cooperation, solitude into community, individuals into a system. The forest is not a collection of trees, it is one organism with many faces, and fungi are the secret lines of connection that hold that vast breathing whole together. If you were asked to picture the largest organism on Earth, your mind might drift toward the ocean first, the blue whale, enormous and graceful, drifting like a living continent through dark water. Or perhaps you'd imagine the giant sequoias of California, trees so tall and ancient they seem less like plants and more like monuments carved by time itself. These beings are titanic, awe-inspiring, visible. They demand your attention simply by existing. But the largest organism on Earth is something you have likely walked over without ever noticing. It does not rise toward the sky. It does not breach in the ocean. It does not tower above you. It lies beneath you, flat, silent, and hidden. A fungus, specifically a honey fungus in the Blue Mountains of eastern Oregon, Armillaria ostoyae. To walk across the forest where it lives is to walk above a single sprawling being the size of a town. Scientists discovered it almost by accident. Trees were dying in patterns that didn't quite match drought, insects, or disease spread. Their roots were softening. Their bark was blackening from within. Something underground was moving methodically, quietly, patiently. When biologists traced it back, not just through one stump, but through dozens, then hundreds, they eventually realized they weren't seeing many fungi. They were seeing one organism, one mycelial network, one living body spreading through the forest floor, not in yards, not in acres, but in thousands of acres. An organism more than 3 miles across, a living lattice weighing hundreds of tons, a being that may be thousands of years old, perhaps older than human civilization itself. And almost all of it is invisible. To stand in that Oregon forest is to stand atop a giant lying just below the ground, a giant whose skin is the carpet of needles, and leaves whose veins are the hyphal threads winding through roots and soil. You could place your hand on the trunk of a nearby tree and feel nothing unusual. But beneath that very tree, a single fungal body is quietly feeding, growing, exploring. The mushrooms it produces, little clusters of golden brown caps, are as insignificant to its full size as freckles on a human arm. Most years it produces none at all. It simply lives underground, feeding on fallen wood, creeping into weakened roots, managing a subterranean empire that has been expanding slowly since long before the Roman Empire, before pyramids, before cities. And this giant is not unique. Michigan harbors another enormous armillaria, British Columbia too. There may be many more scattered across the world, massive ancient organisms hidden beneath forests so spread out and slow-growing that they elude detection for centuries. The only reason the Oregon fungus was discovered was because its destructive footprint left a trail through the trees. But even that word footprint feels too human. A fungus does not stride. It seeps, it permeates, it becomes part of the environment so completely that one almost hesitates to call it an individual. Which raises a quietly unsettling question. What does it mean to be one organism if a single being can stretch across miles, fuse with itself, divide and reunite, persist for millennia, and not possess any central point, no brain, no trunk, no heart? Where do we draw its boundary? Is the organism the network? Is it the genetic identity? Is it the shared chemical memory stored in its threads? Or is individual simply too small a concept for something like this? We're used to individuals being defined by edges, bodies with borders, shapes that are separate from the world around them. But a fungus does not honor those boundaries. It threads through ecosystems like water through cloth linking, spreading, dissolving, growing. Its identity is both unified and diffuse, both singular and everywhere. In many ways, the Oregon honey fungus feels less like a creature and more like a natural force, a slow wildfire of life, creeping underground, reshaping the forest not through flames but through decomposition and quiet colonization. And yet, it is a creature, a single, continuous being. One genetic individual that has survived winter after winter, drought after drought, wildfire after wildfire. It has lived through human migrations, global climate swings, the rise and fall of empires. It has no eyes to see history, no ears to hear it, but it has endured it. There is a strange humility in realizing that humanity measures its milestones in centuries, while fungi measure theirs in millennia. We write our histories in books and monuments. They write theirs in soil and rootwood. A whale may live 90 years. A sequoia may live 3,000. But a fungus might live forever if nothing kills it. Immortal in principle, if not in practice. And so as you imagine that quiet giant beneath the Oregon pines, you might feel a shift inside you, a widening of perspective. Life on Earth has many scales. Some tower above the canopy, some dive to ocean depths, and some spread beneath our feet, unseen yet immense, reminding us that the world's wonders are not always written in size or sound or spectacle. Sometimes the biggest things of all are the ones that hide in silence. To understand fungi as they exist today, sprawling beneath forests, partnering with roots, quietly shaping ecosystems, you have to travel back to a time long before forests, before roots, before anything that could be called a plant. You have to go back over 1 billion years into a world that would feel more alien than familiar. No animals on land, no rustle of leaves, no flowers, no birds, no trees. The continents were barren, silent stone. The land looked like a planet waiting for life to try something bold. And the first bold step did not come from plants. It came from fungi. In those early ages, life thrived almost exclusively in the sea. Tiny organisms drifted in warm mineral-rich water. Early fungi likely lived among them simple filamentous forms closer to what we might now call chytrids, swimming with the help of small flagella. They did not yet build vast underground networks or form towering fruiting bodies. They were small, soft, experimental beings in a world where everything alive was still learning what survival meant. But unlike many early lineages, fungi possessed something special, a talent for breaking things down. Even in their primitive forms, they excelled at digesting tough materials, extracting nutrients from substances others couldn't access. They were recyclers before recycling was a necessity, chemists before chemistry had language. And eventually, as continents rose and climates shifted, something extraordinary happened. A few courageous fungi left the water. Perhaps it was accidental at first, a spore lifted onto damp coastal rock by wind or wave. But once there, something surprising became possible. That barren surface, lifeless and unyielding, was not as empty as it seemed. Rock, even dry rock, holds minerals, and fungi with their arsenal of enzymes could extract those minerals, dissolving microscopic layers, breaking the first cracks into the continents. Fungi were not just the first to arrive on land, they were the first to change it. Imagine an empty shoreline, 1 billion years ago, dark volcanic stone, cold wind, the faintest sheen of tidewater retreating. And somewhere on that stone, a thin film of fungal threads begins to spread, probing, dissolving, digesting. As the threads grow, the rock softens. As the rock softens, dust forms. That dust collects moisture, and in that moisture the earlier soil is born. Before soil there can be no plants. Before plants, no forests. Before forests, no land animals of any kind. But fungi arrived first and they prepared the ground. When simple plant ancestors, tiny algal descendants, began creeping onto land hundreds of millions of years later, they faced a challenge. Their roots were primitive, fragile, and ineffective in hard, nutrient-poor terrain. Alone they would have failed. But they were not alone. Waiting for them, already well established in the cracks of rock, were fungi. And in that meeting, one of the most consequential partnerships in the history of life began. The early plants offered something fungi couldn't make: energy in the form of sugars crafted from sunlight. The fungi offered what the plants couldn't access: minerals and water, pulled from newly forming soil. And together they accomplished what neither could have managed alone. They made land livable. Plant roots aided by fungal networks spread across barren stone. Where they moved, soil deepened. Where soil deepened, more plants took hold. And as plants grew thicker, they shaded the ground, altered rainfall patterns, and began reshaping the atmosphere. Forests existed only because fungi prepared the stage. In fact, fossil evidence shows that nearly all early land plants were supported by fungal partners, ancient mycorrhizal relationships that persist in most ecosystems today. Every towering tree in a modern forest, every blade of grass, every fern, every moss still carries the legacy of that ancient alliance. Plants did not conquer land alone, they were lifted onto it by fungi. And as the partnership grew, so did complexity. Mosses spread across damp ground. Primitive vascular plants rose like thin green spires. Eventually, forests took root, then spread across continents, transforming Earth's landscapes into the lush, oxygen-rich home we now take for granted. Entire terrestrial ecosystems, from the insects that evolved in the leaf litter to the vertebrates that learned to walk on land, owe their existence to that early fungal labour. If you trace the history of every forest back far enough, you do not begin with a tree. You begin with a fungus-dissolving rock, a small, hungry pioneer cracking open a world that had never been alive before. And if you listen closely even now, beneath the roots of the tallest pines and strangest jungle flowers, the partnership continues in silence, unchanged in essence, billions of years old, still shaping the planet grain by grain. Fungi were here before forests, before flowers, before soil, before the green world. They were the architects of habitability, the first explorers of land, the quiet pioneers without whom life on Earth would look nothing like the world you know. If you imagine Earth 450 million years ago, you wouldn't see continents draped in green. You wouldn't find forests, meadows, or even waist-high plants. The land was still mostly barren, rocky brown, silent. A young world just beginning to experiment with life above the waterline. The first plants were humble things, tiny, sponge-like mats clinging to moist shorelines. They lacked true roots. They had no leaves. They could barely stand upright. Alone, they were fragile, too fragile to push more than a few centimeters inland. But they were not alone. Waiting for them, woven into the thin films of protosoil, were fungi that had already spent millions of years adapting to the harshness of dry land. Fungi whose strength was not in height or speed, but in reach, in the microscopic exploration of stone sand and sediment. These fungi, already adept at dissolving minerals and capturing nutrients, encountered the first land plants and discovered an opportunity that would change the planet forever. A trade, a bargain, a partnership. And it was astonishingly simple. Plants, with their new ability to harvest sunlight, could produce sugars. Fungi could not. Fungi, with their vast underground networks, could gather minerals and water from places too tight or too dry for early roots to touch. Plants could not. So the exchange began. Sugars for minerals, energy for hydration, light for life. Fungal threads, thin as smoke, soft as mist, wrapped themselves around primitive plant structures. They infiltrated the outermost cells, forming intimate contact points that allowed molecules to flow between kingdoms. These attachments, called mycorrhizae, were not an afterthought of evolution. They were its turning point. With fungal help, plants gained access to phosphorus, nitrogen, iron, and dozens of other minerals that were locked inside raw rock. With this shared strength, plants finally crossed the invisible threshold between water and land. They grew taller, spread wider, ventured farther from the shore. As they did, fungi moved with them, exploring new territory, building larger networks, extending the reach of plants across continents that had never known the color green. Soil grew deeper, moisture stayed longer, shaded pockets formed where small animals could someday hide. The land, so lifeless for billions of years, began to soften. What started as a microscopic handshake became the foundation of terrestrial life. And here is the part we rarely appreciate: the ancient bargain never ended. Those mycorrhizal partnerships, first formed when plants were little more than green films on stone, are still alive today in nearly every green landscape on Earth. About 90% of modern plant species depend on fungal partners. The tomatoes in your garden, the trees in a city park, the grass across a quiet field, all of them are plugged into fungal networks they did not build but rely on completely. Even the most familiar plants follow ancient rules. A seedling emerging in your backyard sends out its first delicate root hairs, and immediately fungal hyphae swim toward them through the soil, sensing chemical signals across microscopic distances. They wrap the root form nodes of exchange and begin trading minerals for sugar, just as their ancestors did hundreds of millions of years ago. Without that help, many seedlings grow weak, stunted, or fail entirely. Field crops, wheat, corn, beans, rice, depend on these networks too, even though we rarely notice or acknowledge the partners working below. Forests, especially old-growth forests, run on such partnerships at colossal scales, with each tree wired into a mycorrhizal web, like a cell in a much larger organism. These fungal networks extend the root systems of plants by meters, sometimes by kilometers, turning each root tip into a doorway to an entire underground city. It's easy to think of the evolution as progress, plants becoming more independent, more complex, more capable. But nature rarely rewards independence, it rewards cooperation. And the green world thrives not because plants stand alone, but because they never have. They succeeded by refusing to face land alone, by clinging to fungal allies that could do what they could not. So when you look at a tree, its leaves catching sunlight, its trunk rising straight and strong, you're really seeing the visible half of a much older story. The tree is the face, the fungus is the hands, and the soil beneath is the marketplace where they have been trading for hundreds of millions of years. It's humbling to realize that everything we consider terrestrial life was built on this alliance, that forests only exist because fungi cracked rock into soil, that the oxygen we breathe comes from plants supported by fungal networks, that every flower, every fruit, every meadow owes something to threads so thin you could lose one on the tip of a finger. The continents were greened not by plants alone, but by partners moving together, one gathering sunlight above one gathering minerals below, turning an empty world into a living one. That ancient handshake has never been broken. It is beneath every step you take, beneath every forest you've ever seen, beneath almost every bite of food you'll ever eat, still quietly working, still quietly trading, still quietly greening the world. You've probably had this experience. You walk through a familiar patch of grass or forest one day, and nothing unusual sits on the ground, just soil, leaves, stones. Then the next morning, as if the night performed a magic trick, mushrooms have appeared everywhere. Pale domes, tall stems, clusters leaning like dancers, entire circles you swear were not there before. It feels spontaneous, impossible, like something materialized straight out of the dark, and in a way that's exactly what happened. Because the real fungus, the sprawling mycelial network beneath your feet, has been waiting, quietly, patiently, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. It grows without drawing attention, feeding on dead wood, sending chemical messages, gathering nutrients. But all the while it keeps a mental ledger of conditions, moisture, temperature, the availability of energy, the thickness of the soil, even the presence of competing fungi. Mycelium is not conscious, but it is attentive. It tracks changes the way a forest tracks seasons, not in thoughts but in chemistry. And then comes the rain. The first deep rain after a dry stretch doesn't just water the soil, it awakens it. Moisture floods the underground network, soaking into the filaments that have been lying in a state of slow, deliberate dormancy. Temperature drops, humidity rises, the balance shifts, and in that moment the fungus receives its signal now. The transformation that follows is nothing short of astonishing. In hours, sometimes a single night, the fungus moves water with incredible pressure into tiny knots of cells that have been waiting for the right conditions. Those knots swell, expand, and push upward. The soil that resisted them yesterday is suddenly no obstacle. They punch through leaf-litter pine needles, packed earth. They break apart gravel. They lift rocks. They even crack asphalt and concrete when the pressure is high enough, acting like hydraulic jacks made of living tissue. It is one of the most dramatic bursts of growth in the natural world. A mushroom does not grow slowly the way a tree does. It inflates like a balloon, filling with water, powered by the fungus's ability to move moisture with extraordinary force. Some species can double their size in just a few hours. Overnight, a forest floor can go from stillness to abundance, as though the earth itself suddenly sprouted ornaments. And yet, despite their speed and strength, mushrooms remain delicate. Their lifespan is short, sometimes just days, because their purpose is not endurance. Their purpose is release millions, billions, even trillions of spores drifting into the air, carried by wind animals, rainfall, or sheer luck. During this brief moment above ground, mushrooms come in every color and shape imaginable. Some look like umbrellas, others like trumpets. Some are ghostly white, others shockingly red, and a few in the right darkness glow. Bioluminescent fungi, over 70 species known, shine with a soft, eerie green light. Their glow is gentle, like the last trace of a dying ember. It pulses faintly, often visible only when your eyes are fully adjusted to the night. The chemical reaction that creates this light is similar to what illuminates fireflies' luciferin meeting oxygen within specialized cells. To early humans walking through ancient forests, this glow must have felt supernatural. Imagine traveling through dense woods at night, only to find the decaying stump beside the trail shimmering green like a ghostly lantern. Or seeing faint lights scattered across the forest floor, strange cold flames that didn't flicker in the wind. Many cultures found stories for this glow. In Europe, it was called foxfire, said to be carried by enchanted animals or the leftover embers of wandering spirits. In some Asian traditions, glowing logs were believed to house ancestral presences. In the Americas, the glow became part of nighttime myths about forest guardians and trickster spirits. Science has since revealed the chemistry, but the mystery has never fully left. Even now, when you see a glowing fungus, it feels like standing before something ancient, a hint of the forest's dream life, the quiet magic below the surface, rising briefly to meet the night. And all of it happens because the fungus beneath the ground read the weather, gauged the world, and chose its moment. It is easy to think of mushrooms as fragile, but fragile things do not lift concrete. Fragile things do not appear out of nothing in the space of a single evening. Fragile things do not glow in the dark like tiny stars shaped from earth and rain. A mushroom is the brief, brilliant expression of something far older and sturdier than the world above it. A flare sent up by a hidden kingdom, a momentary architecture built by an unseen architect. Tomorrow, the mushrooms may begin to soften. By next week, they may be gone entirely. But the mycelium remains patient, ancient, waiting again for the next perfect alignment of rain and cool air to rise once more from the quiet earth. If you've ever walked through a meadow at dawn or crossed a quiet lawn after a night of rain, you may have noticed something strange, something that feels almost intentionally arranged by nature. A perfect circle of mushrooms evenly spaced as though placed by careful hands. Or perhaps a ring of grass darker and richer than the rest of the field glowing with the early morning dew. Or just as mysteriously, a barren ring where the grass seems to thin and yellow, as if something invisible had swept across it. These rings feel enchanted. They always have. For centuries, people called them fairy rings, places where the hidden folk danced at night, where spirits met in secret circles, where stepping inside might carry you into another world. Folklore warned you not to disturb them. Some said time moved differently inside. Others believed the rings were portals best left alone. And while science has explained their origin, the magic hasn't entirely vanished. Because the truth is still remarkable. A fairy ring is the visible footprint of a single expanding organism. It begins with one spore so light it could float for miles before settling. If that spore lands where moisture lingers, where soil is soft, where nutrients are available, it germinates and begins its quiet work. From that single point, mycelium spreads outward in all directions, forming a growing circle beneath the ground. Each filament pushes into fresh soil, secreting enzymes, breaking down organic matter feeding the network. As the fungus grows, the center of the colony gradually exhausts its resources. The oldest part becomes less active. But the outer edge, the frontier, thrives. This creates a perfect geometry, a continually growing ring expanding year after year. And when conditions are right after rain, with cool nights and high humidity, that advancing edge sends up mushrooms. They emerge in an arc that mirrors the circle of the mycelium below. If the colony is young, the ring may be small, just a few feet across. But as years pass, the ring widens. A circle that is 2 meters across one decade may reach 10 the next. Some rings in Europe are dozens of meters wide. A few have grown for centuries. They are not just patterns, they are living diagrams of time written into the earth. But mushrooms aren't the only sign. Fairy rings often alter the vegetation they touch. Their effect depends on the species and the soil. Some rings create lush, deep green arcs of grass. This happens when the mycelium releases a burst of nitrogen as it digests organic matter. Plants greedily absorb it, flourishing in a narrow band of enhanced fertility. To the human eye, these appear as circles of impossibly healthy grass, almost glowing, almost unreal. Other rings produce barren, yellowed arcs. In these cases, the fungus temporarily overwhelms the soil, releasing chemicals or binding nutrients in a way that starves the grass. The effect is dramatic, a ring of decline etched sharply into a living canvas. Both patterns, lush and barren, are simply different chapters in the same story of expansion. And the rings do not stop growing unless something blocks them. A road, a stream, a building, or another fungal colony. 2 rings that collide may distort each other or disappear into tangled crescents, the quiet signatures of underground negotiations. If you could rise above the meadow, drift high enough to see the patterns from the air, whole fields would suddenly make sense in new ways. Circles, arcs, broken crescents, each one a biography of a fungus slowly pushing outward across decades, sometimes centuries. A map written not in ink but in fruiting bodies and shifting grass. When you step into a fairy ring, you are stepping into the middle of a story that began long before you were born and will likely continue long after you are gone. There is something humbling in that realization, something gentle. Fungi do not rush. They do not demand attention. They grow outward in quiet patience, 1 millimeter at a time, turning the randomness of soil and weather into one of nature's most elegant shapes. And even with all we now understand the biochemistry, the radial growth, the nitrogen gradient standing at the edge of a fairy ring still carries a soft echo of myth. The geometry feels too perfect, the timing too mysterious, the effect too delicate to be entirely explained away. Science has revealed the mechanism. The magic lives on in the feeling. Somewhere beneath your feet, a circle is still expanding still, writing its slow message into the meadow, still weaving its silent presence into the living fabric of the world. A reminder that even the smallest organisms can leave the most beautiful traces if only you take the time to see them. If mushrooms are the brief, fragile fruiting bodies of a far larger underground organism, then spores are the seeds of possibility, tiny weightless messages sent into the world with no guarantee of arrival, but an almost infinite willingness to try. They are so small, so numerous, so impossibly light, that the air around you right now is filled with them. You breathe them in without noticing. They settle on your clothes, drift through open windows, ride air currents across cities, mountains and oceans. And yet you almost never see a single one. A spore is microscopic. Most are only a few micrometers across, small enough that dozens could rest comfortably on the width of a human hair. But their size is part of their power. Because a mushroom does not release a handful of spores, but billions, sometimes trillions in a single night. Imagine standing beneath a mushroom large enough to hold a teacup on its cap. Now imagine that from its gills a fine invisible snow of spores is falling a blizzard of potential life so dense that in laboratory conditions they can create drifts thick enough to see. The sheer scale is staggering. Some mushrooms produce so many spores that if each one successfully became a new fungus, the planet would be buried under a blanket of mushrooms several kilometers deep. Nature avoids that outcome through harsh selection. Almost all spores fail, but the fungus knows this. Its strategy isn't precision, it's abundance. When your children ride the wind, you send as many as the world can hold, and what riders they are. Under a microscope, spores reveal shapes as varied and exquisite as seashells. Some are smooth spheres, others are spiky ridged or netted like tiny alien sculptures. Some have wing-like extensions that act as gliders. Others have sticky coatings to cling to insects or fur. Their forms are evolutionary solutions carved in miniature, each one designed to maximize the chances that a spore will land somewhere with moisture, shade and food. But even the most beautifully designed spore faces long odds. The journey is brutal. Sunlight can kill them, desiccation can shrivel them, cold can crack them, heat can cook them, UV radiation in the upper atmosphere can strip their molecular structure, and yet spores survive it all. Fungal spores are among the toughest biological structures on Earth. Some remain viable after freezing in Antarctic ice for decades. Others survive being baked on desert sand. Still others hitch rides in hurricane winds that lift them kilometers into the sky. High-altitude research balloons have detected spores drifting in the upper atmosphere, riding currents that circle the Earth. A spore released from a mushroom in one forest might settle weeks later on a distant coastline, or on the branch of a tree it has never seen. In this way, fungi are global travelers, cosmic, almost carried to places their underground networks could never reach. And every breath you take contains them. Depending on where you stand, forest, city, coast, you inhale anywhere from a few dozen to tens of thousands of spores with each breath, harmless, unnoticed, drifting through your lungs like passengers passing through a bustling train station. The air is never empty. Even the cleanest breeze is a living mixture: pollen, bacteria, dust, salt, and spores. It can be unsettling to realize that the sky is filled with invisible life, but it's also strangely comforting. The world is not sterile. It is connected, dynamic, constantly exchanging pieces of itself. The forest doesn't end at its own edge. The spore cloud it sends upward becomes part of the atmosphere we all share. Fungi write their presence into the air as softly as breath on a cold window, and each spore is a tiny time capsule. Inside its shell lies everything it needs to become a new fungus if conditions are right. A spark of genetic potential. Instructions for building mycelium-forming partnerships, digesting wood-shaping ecosystems. A single spore that lands in the perfect place can give rise to a network stretching meters or miles, one that will spread for decades or centuries. The leap from microscopic dot to vast living lattice is one of nature's quiet miracles, a transformation so small in its beginning, so immense in its result. When you look at a mushroom now, you might imagine its gills or pores not as simple structures, but as factories of dust-like hope. Each spore a traveller, each release a gamble, each night of fruiting a celebration of possibility. And when you step outside and feel the wind on your face, you might remember that it carries traces of a hidden kingdom. Millions of tiny emissaries drifting between worlds, falling on leaves and rooftops and oceans, writing the fungal story across the planet one grain at a time, invisible and everywhere. Section 10. When you pick up a mushroom, or simply pause long enough to look at one closely, you're holding a piece of biological architecture shaped by millions of years of quiet experimentation. A mushroom is not merely a cap and a stem. It is a three-dimensional solution to a single evolutionary problem. How can a fungus pack as much spore-producing surface area as possible into a compact, lightweight, rain-soaked structure, and still lift it high enough for the wind to catch its spores? Everything you see on a mushroom, the curves, the folds, the hollows, the ridges, is an answer to that question. And every lineage has answered it in a different way. If you could shrink yourself small enough to walk under a mushroom cap, it would feel like entering a cathedral made of living tissue pillars, vaults, repeating patterns, all designed with mathematical precision. The underside of the mushroom is the true marvel, a hidden world of engineering that few people inspect but every forest depends on. You might start with the classic form, the gilled mushroom. Beneath a typical mushroom cap, the gills, thin blades of tissue radiating outward like the pages of a book, fanned open, create vast acreage in miniature. Their spacing, thickness and angles vary between species, each variation fine-tuning airflow and maximizing the number of spores that can form on the microscopic surfaces. If you flattened all the gills from a single supermarket mushroom, the surface area might surprise you. It would be several times larger than the cap itself. Gills are deceptively simple. They appear delicate, and yet they're strong enough to hold dense forests of spores. The spacing between them is not random. Some mushrooms prefer tight arrangements with hundreds of gills. Others create wide, elegant spacing. A mushroom's identity is written in these patterns, whether its gills run down the stem like rivulets barely touch it, or float freely with a tiny gap before the stem begins. Mycologists read these distinctions the way architects read blueprints. But gills are only the beginning. Some mushrooms abandon the fragile blade-like design entirely, and instead build pores, tiny tubes packed into surfaces like honeycomb. These pore-bearing fungi, most famously the bracket or shelf mushrooms that cling to tree trunks, solve the same problem with a sturdier strategy. Instead of gills that might tear or collapse under rain, they create a sponge-like underside of vertical tubes. Each tube is a protected chamber where spores mature and then drift out through round openings. Imagine a beehive, reversed spores, falling downward air currents, rising upward, all within a layered system that can persist for years. A bracket fungus might endure dozens of storms, snowfalls or heat waves without losing its structure. This longevity allows it to release spores season after season, each new layer, thickening its woody body like annual rings on a tree. Then there are morels, those springtime treasures that look less like mushrooms and more like small hollow volcanoes made of crisscrossing ridges and pits. Their honeycomb surface is not just beautiful, it's efficient. Each ridge and hollow produces spores, dramatically increasing usable area, without requiring a wide cap or numerous layers. Morels, for all their delicate appearance, are masterpieces of lightweight construction. Their hollow interior allows them to rise quickly after spring rains, and their textured exterior transforms even the softest breeze into a spore-lifting engine. The labyrinthine pattern is so effective that its basic geometry appears again and again in fungal evolution, as if nature cannot stop trying to refine it. In a different corner of the kingdom, chanterelles take another approach. Instead of true gills, which are sharp blade-like, and easily broken chanterelles decorate their undersides with soft, shallow ridges. These ridges run down the stem in gentle waves, less like the pages of a book and more like the flowing folds of a trumpet. Their golden apricot-coloured bodies catch light in the dim forest, almost glowing under tree canopies. These ridges solve the same engineering problem in a more subtle way. They create surface area without the fragility of gills. A chanterelle can withstand rough weather, the feet of animals, and a forager's basket without losing its spore-bearing power. And then there are mushrooms that mimic coral reefs. Coral fungi rise from the forest floor like miniature branching cities. Every tiny branch and sub-branch serves as a spore platform. The architecture is fractal divided, and you get the same branching pattern on smaller scales. This design maximizes surface area in every direction, allowing spores to escape from all sides. Coral fungi look improbable, almost ornamental, as if nature were sketching in 3 dimensions. Their complexity is extreme, but their logic is clear: more branches mean more spores. Some fungal engineers look downward instead of upward. They build geometric marvels in the soil structures that only reveal themselves when they push slightly above the surface. Earth stars, for example, begin as simple spheres. Then the sphere cracks open into radial arms that peel back like starfish legs, lifting the inner spore sac off the ground. The opening and closing of these rays depend on humidity. They contract when dry, sheltering the spore sac, and splay open when moisture returns ready for dispersal. Earth stars are like living origami, their movements slow but purposeful. All of these shapes, gills, pores, honeycombs, ridges, branches, stars are variations on a single theme: the quest for maximum surface area in minimum volume. Evolution has tried hundreds of designs across hundreds of millions of years, tweaking angles, repeating patterns, folding and refolding biological fabric. And because mushrooms grow quickly and decay quickly, evolution can experiment at a pace trees or animals cannot match. A forest after rain is a gallery of these solutions. Each mushroom is both sculpture and machine, each form a testament to what works in the quiet laboratories beneath our feet. You are surrounded by evolutionary architecture structures that appear for only a moment, release their invisible stories into the air and vanish again. Yet their designs endure, carried forward by spores riding the wind, waiting to build new cathedrals on new forest floors. If the mushroom kingdom has an imaginative side, and it certainly does, it reveals itself in the fruiting bodies that don't look like mushrooms at all. These are the organisms that seem to have escaped from fairy tales, from children's books, from the sketchbooks of artists who love strange shapes and unexpected biology. They are fungi that have taken the basic challenge of reproduction, spread spores as widely as possible, and answered it with strategies so whimsical, so odd, so theatrical, that seeing them for the first time feels like stumbling into a secret parade. Take, for example, the humble puffball. A puffball doesn't open outward like a classic mushroom. It doesn't lift gills toward the air or unfurl pores like a bracket fungus. Instead, it swells like a tiny balloon, smooth, round, unassuming, until the moment it matures. Inside, a mass of spores forms a powdery brown cloud, and then, with the gentlest pressure, a raindrop, a footstep, a curious touch, the puffball exhales. A visible plume erupts. It drifts upward in a soft brown breath, a miniature smoke signal rising from the forest floor. Children have played with puffballs for centuries, tapping them to watch the smoke billow out. But that smoke is life, billions of spores released in an instant. To the fungus, the puff is a trumpet blast announcing that it is time to scatter descendants into the wind. Some puffballs grow to the size of baseballs, others become giant puffballs, pale and smooth and astonishingly large, sometimes as big as a soccer ball. A single giant puffball can release trillions of spores. If you cut one open before maturity, its interior is creamy white and solid. Once it begins to age, that inside darkens and loosens, becoming the powdery dust of possibility that waits for pressure and a breath of air. But puffballs are just the beginning. The forest floor also hides the remarkable bird's nest fungi creations, so miniature and perfect that they seem sculpted for storytelling. At just a centimetre or 2 across, they are easy to miss tiny cups clustered on decaying wood or buried among leaf litter. Inside each cup sit small lentil-sized eggs, each one a package of spores called a peridiole. They are astonishing not just because they mimic nests, but because of how they launch their spores. A raindrop falls, it strikes the cup. The impact catapults the eggs outward, sometimes several centimetres, helping spores hitch rides on passing animals or stick to nearby vegetation. It's a physics demonstration in miniature, a trebuchet built into a fungus the size of your fingernail. Birds' nest fungi turn rainfall into artillery. What looks like whimsy is actually engineering. And then there are Earth stars fungi that fold and unfold like something designed for the slow ballet of another planet. Buried as round, pale balls, they sit hidden until moisture arrives. Then the outer layer of the ball cracks into star-like arms. These arms peel back and arch downward, lifting the inner spore sac high enough to catch the breeze. The Earth star opens when it rains and closes when it dries, like a creature breathing with the weather. Some species even react to humidity by bending their rays, altering the angle at which the spore sac sits, a living barometer, with each point adjusting to moisture levels. Found on sandy soils or among pine needles, Earth stars don't simply grow, they perform. But the fungal kingdom also includes organisms with strategies that defy delicacy or beauty, and instead embrace the grotesque. Enter the stinkhorns. If puffballs release spores through a gentle cloud and bird's nest fungi use raindrops as catapults, stinkhorns take a more dramatic route. They recruit insects. And not just any insects, flies the ones attracted to the smell of rot. A stinkhorn emerges rapidly from a gelatinous egg, sometimes growing several inches in a single day. Once it reaches full height, the cap becomes coated in a foul-smelling slime rich with spores. To humans, it smells like decay. To a fly, it smells like opportunity. The flies land on the cap, feed on the slime, and walk away with spores smeared on their legs and wings. They then transport those spores to new locations, an airborne courier service powered by scavengers. It's a clever inversion of disgust. What repels one species lures another. The shapes stinkhorns take are just as bizarre: cages, lattices, veined geometric domes, or tall phallic towers that seem to have burst into existence overnight. Some species glow with orange or red tones, making their presence even more dramatic. They are the shock artists of the fungal world, evolving bold forms and bold scents, because subtlety does not recruit flies. Together, these strange fruiting bodies demonstrate a fundamental truth about fungi. When evolution gives you a mandate: spread spores, there is no single correct answer. Only creativity, only innovation. A puffball chooses air pressure, a bird's nest chooses raindrops, an earth star chooses geometry, a stinkhorn chooses smell. All of them succeed. In the quiet places of the forest, in the softness of decaying wood, in the microclimates under leaves, fungi have evolved the most unexpected expressions of life. Some whimsical, some eerie, some breathtaking. Each one a reminder that nature's inventions extend far beyond the everyday shapes we recognize. And all of them whisper the same message: the world is stranger and more imaginative than we often realize. If you could peel back the forest floor like the cover of a book, lifting soil and stones and roots as easily as turning a page, you would find that the true story of a forest doesn't happen above ground at all. The trees, the ferns, the herbs, everything green and growing is only the visible half. Beneath your feet lies a system so intricate and so alive that calling it soil feels almost too simple. It is a woven world of hyphae and roots, minerals and moisture, an underground mesh of alliances older than any forest on Earth. And at the heart of this world are the partnerships we call mycorrhizae. The word sounds technical, but its meaning is poetic. Mycofungus plus rhiza root, fungus root. Two beings, one not. A single life made from cooperation. For almost every plant, you can see almost every flower in a meadow, every blade of grass, every seedling struggling in the shade. This partnership isn't optional. It's the rule. Around 90% of plant species depend on fungi to survive. Not occasionally, not in hard times, but every day. Without fungi, most roots are blind. Their reach is short, their grasp is weak. With fungi, roots become hundreds of times larger. In effect, more sensitive, more capable, more connected. But not all partnerships look the same. The underground world has multiple languages, multiple architectures. The first is ectomycorrhizae, the outer symbiosis. These fungi wrap themselves around plant roots like soft gloves. They do not enter the root cells. Instead, they weave between them, creating a sheath that improves water uptake and intercepts minerals locked in soil. Ectomycorrhizal fungi dominate in forests with pines, oaks, birches, beeches, trees whose roots are never alone. If you could see the sheath under a microscope, it would look like a labyrinth of threads, pressed close against the plant's skin, touching everywhere, but never piercing. The second type goes deeper, literally. Arbuscular mycorrhizae. The inner symbiosis actually enter the plant root cells. Inside, they form tiny branching structures that look like coral or miniature trees arbuscules. These are sites of trade sugars flowing outward from plant to fungus. Phosphorus, nitrogen, and micronutrients flowing inward from fungus to plant. This intimate partnership is ancient, older than forests, older than flowers, older even than most of the continents in their present forms. Arbuscular mycorrhizae helped the first land plants take their fragile steps onto dry ground 450 million years ago. Plants gave fungi sugar. Fungi gave plants the ability to live on land. That alliance never ended. But mycorrhizae are more than nutrient pipelines. The networks they form are not just connections, they are relationships. Some forests are known for their towering trees, but their true giants may be the mother's older trees with thick crowns and deep roots, connected to vast webs of fungal networks. These mother trees act as anchors, reservoirs of stability in a changing world. Their roots and the fungi that lace through them recognize their own seedlings, the tiny sprouts growing in their shadow. And through the mycorrhizal network, they feed them. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, literally. Mother trees send sugars, minerals, and water along fungal threads to support their children in the dim, difficult light of the understory. The seedlings that receive this support survive at far higher rates than those cut off from the network. It is not altruism in a human sense, but an emergent property of connectivity. The fungal web makes family possible. Yet these networks do more than share nutrition. They share information. Imagine a spruce sapling on one side of a forest suddenly attacked by caterpillars. As insects chew into its needles, the sapling releases chemical signals into the air and sends warnings through the soil, through its fungal partners through the darkness below. Minutes or hours later, trees that have never been touched by insects begin to alter their chemistry. They boost defensive compounds. They shift their metabolism. They become less appetizing, more prepared. One plant's misfortune becomes another's warning. In this way, the fungal network behaves like a nervous system, not conscious but responsive. Not intelligent, but communicative. It is a protocol for survival written in chemistry rather than language. The forest doesn't think in the way you do, but it reacts, it adapts, it prepares. If you walk in a forest at dusk and feel the quiet intelligence around you, this is part of what you're sensing. Not mystical in the supernatural sense, but mystical in the biological one. A community shaped by signals you cannot hear and agreements you cannot see. A society woven not in sunlight but in soil, and the fungi benefit too. This is not selflessness. Plants give away as much as 30% of the sugars they produce to their fungal partners. In return, fungi shelter plants from drought, protect roots from pathogens, expand access to rare minerals, stabilize soil, and transform ecosystems. A tree is not a solitary being. A meadow is not a field of individuals. A forest is not a collection of separate trunks. The world beneath your feet is a connected republic, a union negotiated by chemistry and sustained by threads as fine as smoke. And whether you're walking on pine needles or prairie grass or the mossy floor of a temperate rainforest, the web is always there, patient, ancient, and alive. If the fungal kingdom is a realm of cooperation, then some of its alliances are so extreme, so specialized, that the species involved have become inseparable, bound together by evolution in ways that feel almost like devotion. These are not casual partnerships. They are lifelong dependencies, fragile and astonishing, shaped by millions of years of trust between organisms that can't speak, can't move, and yet somehow found each other in the dark. Consider the orchid. To us, an orchid is elegance petals shaped like insects or stars, colours soft as twilight or loud as a carnival. But behind the beauty lies a vulnerability so profound that it borders on improbable. Orchid seeds are the smallest of any flowering plant. They're not seeds so much as dust. A single orchid pod can release millions of these powder-fine grains into the air. But each seed is almost empty inside, no food, no endosperm, no stored energy to get the seedling through its first days. It is a child born without a lunchbox, stepping out into the world with nothing but a hope. So orchids made a deal. When an orchid seed drifts onto soil, it cannot germinate alone. It must immediately find the right fungus, a very specific fungal partner, and invite those fungal threads inside its body. The fungus then nourishes the seedling, supplying sugars, minerals, and water until the tiny plant can grow leaves and begin photosynthesis. Without that fungus, the seed simply waits and dies unnoticed. Every orchid you have ever seen, every elegant bloom in a florist shop or tropical forest is alive because somewhere long before it was visible, a fungus embraced it in the dark. Some orchids take that dependency even further. These are the myco-heterotrophic orchids, the ghostly ones. They never become green, they never photosynthesize. They live pale white or blushed pink or translucent like something sculpted from candle wax. You may know one famous example, Monotropa uniflora, the ghost pipe. These plants are not parasites of trees directly. They are parasites of fungi that partner with trees. They tap into the mycorrhizal network like thieves in the night, siphoning carbon that the fungus earned honestly from its tree partner. And the fungus, unable to defend against this subtle theft, continues feeding the orchid anyway. Some forests contain entire communities of these spectral plants, orchids, and relatives living their whole lives as quiet, fungal-powered apparitions. And then deep beneath oak and hazelnut roots, another extreme partnership unfolds a story that humans have entered with enthusiasm, dogs in tow, the truffle. Unlike most mushrooms, truffles fruit underground, hidden, secretive, never lifting their bodies into the air. By choosing a subterranean life, they protected themselves from drying winds and hungry animals. But they paid a heavy price. Buried bodies cannot release spores into the wind. No breezes reach them. No rain can splash their spores outward. So truffles found a different strategy. They learned to manufacture desire. A truffle creates a mix of volatile, complex molecules aromas that rise through soil in faint, irresistible plumes. To humans, these scents are earthy, nutty, musky, electric-evoking forests after rain, deep roots and warm soil. To animals, they are even more irresistible. Wild pigs dig them up. Foxes and rodents eat them. Deer sniff them out. Insects burrow toward them. Every animal that consumes a truffle becomes a spore disperser, carrying the fungus to new territory inside its gut. The truffle survives the digestive journey and emerges in a perfect fertilizer packet near suitable host trees. The strategy is stunningly effective. Humans predictably became part of the loop. Long ago, people noticed that pigs could find truffles better than any human knows. Later, dogs proved even more cooperative, and today, truffle hunters walk through European forests before dawn, while a trained dog zigzags between roots, pausing, suddenly pouring gently at the ground. The dog smells something ancient, something buried, something fungal and fragrant and wildly expensive. The truffle isn't trying to attract humans or their dogs, of course. It is simply broadcasting its call. But in our fascination with this buried delicacy, we have become one more species enlisted in its reproductive plan. Even in markets wrapped in cloth or nestled in rice, a truffle continues to breathe its aroma into the air, still trying even in death to summon an animal that might help it spread. Orchids blooming only because of fungi they cannot live without. Ghostly plants surviving purely as fungal parasites. Truffles shaping animal behavior through scent alone. These are the extreme partnerships at the edges of the fungal world, stories of dependency so complete they reshape the organisms involved. Stories of hidden alliances that turned forests into networks of mutual obligation and subterranean trade. And all of it happens in darkness, quietly, effortlessly, as if cooperation were the most natural thing on Earth. If you picture farming, you probably imagine sunlight fields of crops stretching beneath open sky human hands, sowing seeds, tending rows, harvesting at the right moment. Agriculture feels like a signature of our species, a turning point in our history. But long before humans planted the first grain, another kind of farmer was already at work. Not under the sun, but in the dark. Not with tools, but with mandibles. And not alone, but in vast societies humming beneath the forest floor. Leafcutter ants and fungus-growing termites are among the most extraordinary farmers on Earth, conducting agriculture so sophisticated and so ancient that by comparison, human farming looks like a newcomer's experiment. These insects don't just gather food, they grow it, they protect it, they breed it, and they've been doing it for tens of millions of years. Leafcutter ants, the silent harvesters. In the humid forests of the Americas, you might hear them before you see them, an almost electrical rustling in the understory like a soft, continuous rain of tiny footsteps. Follow the sound and you'll find a long parade of ants workers marching single file, each one carrying a green fragment many times its own size. A procession of living flags. These are leafcutter ants, and their behavior looks at first like foraging. But the ants aren't eating the leaves, they have no interest in chewing them. Instead, they are taking them home to feed someone else. Beneath the soil, hidden in chambers large enough to fill small rooms, the ants tend to their treasure fungal gardens. Leaf fragments are chewed by smaller worker ants into pulp carefully inoculated with a specific fungus that the ants have cultivated for millions of years. This fungus, Leucoagaricus gongylophorus, cannot survive without the ants, and the ants cannot survive without it. They are farmers and crop alike. Inside the nest, the fungus grows as soft, spongy mats. Special structures form on its surface tiny swollen nodules called gongylidia, rich in sugars and lipids. These are the ants' food. They harvest these nodules the way humans harvest grain, returning again and again to trim and tend their living crops. And maintenance is constant. If harmful molds threaten the garden, tiny worker ants, essentially, the colony's gardeners, pluck them out with their mandibles. Others apply antimicrobial secretions from their bodies. Some even carry beneficial bacteria on their skin that suppress parasitic fungi, the same way a human farmer might release ladybugs to control aphids. It is agriculture perfected in miniature. Termite farmer cities built for fungi, leaf-cutter ants are remarkable. But termites take fungal farming to architectural extremes. In parts of Africa and Asia, towering termite mounds rise from savannas and forest structures as tall as small buildings shaped by climate, temperature, and the steady labour of millions of insects. Inside these cathedrals of soil lies the true marvel fungus gardens built in darkness. These termites do not eat the raw plant material they gather dead grasswood leaf litter. Their guts cannot handle it. Instead, they break it down, shape it into small pellets, and use it as substrate for a fungus called termitomyces. The fungus digests the tough plant fibers, making the nutrients accessible to the termites. In return, the fungus gains protection, shelter, stable humidity, and a constant supply of food. Termite workers control airflow in the mound opening or closing vents, like living thermostats, to give their fungus the perfect climate. Some termitomyces mushrooms grow enormous caps among the largest mushrooms on Earth, bursting from the mound's surface after rain like pale umbrellas. But most of the fungus remains inside, woven through galleries shaped by the termites themselves. A termite colony is not just a nest. It is a farm regulated by environmental engineering so precise that human architects study termite mounds for inspiration. Queens as carriers of culture. Perhaps the most astonishing part is how these underground civilizations begin. When a young ant or termite queen flies out to start a new colony, she does not go empty-handed. Hidden in her mouth or inside her gut is a tiny culture of the fungus. Her species depends on a starter kit, a seed of agriculture. This is domestication in its purest form. The ants carry fungal strands, the termites carry fungal spores. They transport their crops the way our ancestors carried grain. And just like human farmers, these insects have co-evolved with their fungi. The fungi have lost the ability to survive without their insect partners. The insects have specialized anatomy and behavior solely for tending the fungi. The partnership is permanent, inherited, refined through millions of years of change. Humans have been farming for perhaps 12,000 years. Leafcutter ants have been farming for 20 million. Termites for even longer. When we imagine agriculture as uniquely human, we overlook the silent proving grounds beneath our feet. Civilizations building gardens in darkness, evolving cooperative strategies long before our species learned to plant seeds. If you could shrink down and walk inside a termite mound, you would see chambers glowing with the pale threads of cultivated fungus tended by countless workers. You would hear the low vibration of wings, the whisper of soil being shaped, the hum of a living, breathing farm. You would recognize the logic instantly, the planning, the cooperation, the care. And you might realize that agriculture didn't begin with humans at all. We are simply the latest members of a very old tradition. If a forest could keep every leaf it ever dropped, every fallen branch, every toppled tree, it would slowly drown in its own history. Layer upon layer of dead matter would pile up brown brittle, accumulating like pages in an unread book. Sunlight would never reach the soil. Nutrients would be locked away in bark and wood trapped in forms that plants cannot use. Life would grind to a halt beneath a suffocating archive of the past. But forests do not drown. They breathe. They breathe because fungi take the dead and return it to the living. Fungi are the primary decomposers of Earth's terrestrial world. Without them, forest would be cemeteries still airless, buried beneath their own debris. Every green shoot you see, every flower, every blade of grass is possible only because of the fungal work that happened before it. When you walk through a forest, your feet rest on the remains of countless leaves and logs recycled by fungi turned back into soil, so fine it can slip between your fingers. And this recycling begins almost immediately after something dies. The first invaders, soft rot and sugar thieves. When a tree falls, it doesn't instantly become part of the soil. Its wood is armoured full of cellulose and lignin, two of the most stubborn molecules in nature. Insects nibble at the bark, microbes begin probing the cracks, but the real experts arrive quietly, fungi designed for early decay. These pioneers, often called soft rot fungi, don't tackle the entire log at once. They start by consuming the simple sugars and starches available in the wood's outer layers. They're opportunists, quick and temporary, opening the door for other species to follow. Their hyphae snake through the bark and the outer cambium, softening the wood, letting in moisture. They're preparing the stage for something more powerful. Brown rot and white rot fungi, the master decomposers. Over time, tougher fungi move in brown rot and white rot species, each wielding specialized chemical tools capable of tearing apart molecules almost nothing else on Earth can touch. Brown rot fungi break down cellulose but leave behind lignin, turning the wood into crumbly brown cubes. These fungi use astonishing chemistry, They generate free radicals, tiny reactive particles that diffuse through the wood and rip cellulose apart like invisible teeth. The wood breaks down quickly, collapsing under its own weakened structure. White rot fungi take on lignin itself, a molecule so complex and resistant that scientists still marvel at its durability. These fungi use enzymes like peroxidases and lacases to crack lignin's chaotic bonds, bleaching the wood until it becomes pale, soft, almost ghost-like. Without white rot fungi, the planet's forests would be buried under an ever-deepening layer of lignin-rich wood. Together, brown rot and white rot make decomposition possible. One specializes in breaking the structure, the other specializes in dismantling the armor. A log's long journey, decades of transformation. If you sit quietly on a fallen log and imagine time speeding up, the decay unfolds like a slow-motion ballet. Over years, the log softens. Over decades, it collapses. Over centuries, it becomes indistinguishable from the soil. In the first decade, bark peels away mycelium threads through the wood, and small mushrooms appear, brackets, cups, delicate caps rising after rain. Beetles move in, ants excavate tiny tunnels, moss settles on the surface. In the second decade, the wood loses cohesion. You can poke a finger into it and feel the sponge-like give. Fungal communities shift early. Species drop away as new ones take their place, each phase requiring different enzymes, different strategies. In the third decade and beyond, the log collapses into humus, a dark, rich material teeming with new life. What was once a tree trunk now supports seedlings. Woodpeckers and owls once nested in its cavities. Now roots drink from what remains. A log is not a dead thing, it is a changing world. Leaf litter, a faster dance. Leaves follow a similar but quicker path. When autumn arrives and forests shed their solar panels, leaf litter becomes a feast. Thin, delicate leaves decompose much faster than wood, weeks to months rather than years to decades. Different fungi appear here too, litter-decomposing fungi, elegant specialists that dissolve leaf tissues, veins and cuticles. Their enzymes are precise, targeted, refined by a long evolutionary apprenticeship. As they work, nutrients locked in leaves, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, return to the soil. Without this recycling, forests would starve. Nutrients would remain frozen in old leaves, instead of rising into new ones. Every spring, the forest unfurls new green only because fungi unlocked last year's dead, preventing the world from becoming a museum. Imagine every forest on Earth all producing leaves, branches, trunks, needles, cones, and roots year after year. If nothing decomposed, the planet would be buried in centuries of biological debris. The Amazon alone produces billions of tons of organic matter every year. Without fungi, it would rise in heaps thicker than buildings, but fungi prevent that. They digest the past to make room for the present. They unbuild what was built. They soften what was rigid. They take apart the unbreakable and turn it into nourishment. The forest is able to grow because the forest is always being taken apart. The cycle continues. You can think of a forest not as a collection of trees, but as a looping cycle of life and death and rebirth, an ecosystem that only works because fungi keep the circle turning. They are the recyclers, the dissolvers, the quiet engineers of renewal. Every patch of rich soil is the biography of countless fungal workers. Every young seedling rises because old wood fell. Every root drinks from molecules that were once leaves, once branches, once towering trunks. The past becomes the future through their work, and the forest stays alive because something is always willing to take on the difficult, essential task of letting the old return to the earth. In this way, fungi keep the world moving forward. Without them, everything would stop. When you think of the Earth's climate of carbon moving through air, oceans, forests and soil, you may imagine photosynthesis, fossil fuels, volcanic eruptions, or even the breath of animals. But the true heartbeat of the global carbon cycle often lies in darkness, in the quiet work of organisms you rarely see. Fungi, with their tireless decomposition, sit at the center of the planet's carbon economy. They are both creators and consumers of carbon pathways, orchestrating exchanges that influence everything from soil fertility to atmospheric chemistry. Every time a fungus breaks down wood or leaf litter, it performs a chemical transformation that reverberates across the planet. Its enzymes tear cellulose and lignin apart, freeing carbon molecules that plants captured from the air decades or centuries ago. Some of that carbon becomes new fungal tissue mycelium, spreading like threads of thought through the soil. but much of it becomes something else, carbon dioxide released back into the atmosphere. This process is called respiration, and it is as essential as photosynthesis. Without decomposition, carbon would remain trapped in wood and leaves, preventing new growth. Without new growth, forests would stagnate. Without respiration, the carbon cycle would collapse. You might imagine fungi as silent chemists regulating the flow of carbon between the living and the dead. And like all chemical reactions, their work depends on the world around them, on temperature, moisture, and the delicate balance of seasons. Heat speeds, cold slows, climate shapes decay. Walk through a boreal forest in autumn where temperatures drop quickly and the soil grows cold and stiff. Fallen logs there decay slowly, sometimes so slowly that a tree can take a century to fully return to the soil. The fungal metabolism inside it has become sluggish, like a heartbeat slowed by winter sleep. In a warm, wet rainforest, however, decomposition happens at astonishing speed. A log falls, and within months, fungus has turned it into a soft sponge. Within years, it may disappear entirely, transformed into nutrients, carbon dioxide, and new life intertwined with the next generation of roots. Temperature and moisture govern everything fungi do. Warm plus moist. Fast decay. Cold plus dry plus slow decay. Wet but oxygen poor. Very slow decay, as in bogs where peat accumulates for millennia. But these delicate rhythms are shifting. Climate change is altering rainfall patterns, raising temperatures and lengthening warm seasons. In many regions, fungi now fruit earlier in the year and continue fruiting later. Some show 2 fruiting waves where only one existed before. Decomposition speeds up under warmer conditions, releasing carbon more quickly. This creates a feedback loop: warmer climate, faster decay, more CO2 released, warmer climate. Forests that once acted as carbon sinks risk becoming carbon sources if their decomposers accelerate too far. But fungi aren't just participants in the carbon cycle, they're also potential healers. When the world breaks, fungi clean up. Some fungi don't just decompose fallen trees, they decompose pollution. This field, mycoremediation, is one of the most hopeful intersections of biology and environmental repair. Fungi have evolved enzymes so powerful, so versatile, that they can dismantle molecules even humans struggle to process. Fungi have been shown to digest or neutralize oil spills, breaking down long-chain hydrocarbons, pesticides and herbicides degrading persistent toxins, industrial dyes, heavy metals binding them in stable forms, plastics, certain polyurethane-eating species, explosives such as TNT and RDX. To a fungus, many pollutants are simply complex carbon structures waiting to be cracked open. When you observe a fungus dissolving lignin, the incredibly tough polymer that gives wood its strength, you begin to understand how these organisms can also dissolve petroleum, pesticides, or chemical waste. The enzymatic machinery is the same, the targets are just unfamiliar. In the aftermath of oil spills, for instance, researchers have spread fungal mats over contaminated soil. Weeks later, the oil's black sludge has turned into rich brown earth. Mushrooms sprout where nothing else could survive. In some experiments, worms return to soils restored by fungi, tiny pioneers, signaling that life is re-establishing itself. In landfills, fungi are being tested against polyurethane, one of the most persistent plastics. Deep underground species such as Pestaloteuopsis, Microspora, chew slowly at material designed to last centuries. Even explosives molecules engineered to resist degradation can be dismantled by certain white rot fungi, their aggressive enzymes dismantling TNT like a fallen tree. The fungal kingdom is not only a recycler of the natural world, it may be part of the cleanup crew for the industrial world as well. A living planet depends on fungal work. Carbon does not move through the world in a simple circle. It moves through spirals from air to plant to fungus to atmosphere to soil to forest to ocean to sky again. Fungi sit at the node where life becomes death and death becomes life again. They determine how fast a forest breathes. They influence how much carbon the soil stores. They regulate the release of greenhouse gases. They mediate the balance between growth and decay. And as the climate shifts, they shift, with it responding faster than most organisms can, altering the pace of decomposition, reshaping carbon pathways that define the future of ecosystems. If you stand in a forest and breathe deeply, the air filling your lungs carries carbon released by fungal metabolism carbon that once lived in leaves or trunks or ancient soil, and the oxygen you inhale was made possible by the carbon released before it. The fungal kingdom is part of your breath, part of the climate, part of the living planet's metabolism. Fungi help stabilize the earth. They help heal it. They help regulate its ancient rhythms. They help determine what kind of world we will inherit. All of this happens quietly beneath your feet, held in the threads of a kingdom that rarely reveals itself, but holds the planet together in ways both powerful and unseen. There is a rhythm to fungal life, a tempo slower than rain, slower than wind, slower even than the movement of trees across centuries. If plants follow the seasons with visible certainty, buds in spring, leaves in summer colour in autumn, fungi inhabit a quieter calendar. Their timing is not a simple cycle, but a tapestry of signals, moisture, moonless nights, hard frost, soil temperature, biochemical whispers in wood, long waits broken by sudden opportunities. Think of it as mushroom time, patient, unpredictable, exquisitely tuned. Some mushrooms appear reliably each year, others test your memory. They emerge only when conditions are perfect, once every few years or even once in a decade, so that finding them feels less like foraging and more like witnessing a rare celestial event, the rare and the patient. There are mushrooms so patient you might live beside them for years before they reveal themselves. Certain Matsutake appear only when humidity soil microbes and the chemistry of aging pine roots align. Some coral fungi erupt after extended droughts followed by a single soaking rain. Even humbler species delicate cups and earth-toned caps have fruiting cycles that defy human scheduling. They wait for the intersection of temperature, light, moisture and subterranean cues only they can sense. You cannot hurry a mushroom, you can only wait for it. Spring versus autumn, the two great seasons. Most fungi fruit in spring or autumn, but the reasons vary with astonishing nuance. Spring mushrooms are opportunists. They rise from warming soil, rich with winter's melt and decaying leaves. Morels are the great ambassadors of spring. They thrive when cold nights still linger, but daylight begins to coax life upward. They prefer fire scars, disturbed soils, newly dead trees. Their season is short, a breath spanning weeks, sometimes days. Autumn mushrooms, by contrast, are strategists. The soil is warm from summer rain's return, and the nights cool sharply. This combination, warm earth plus cool air plus moisture, is ideal for spore production. Autumn forests explode with diversity: chanterelles, boletes, rustlers, honey mushrooms, amanitas. This is the season of abundance, when the underground mycelium has spent the year gathering energy and finally releases its architectural masterpieces. Spring is promise, autumn is fulfillment, cold fronts and secret signals. One of the most striking fungal behaviours is synchronized fruiting, when an entire species in a forest seems to rise at once. Researchers studying certain boletes and amanitas note that after a sudden cold front, mushrooms may appear in waves, almost as though the drop in temperature acts as a signal, and perhaps it does. Temperature shifts can trigger enzymatic cascades in mycelium, telling it to begin building fruiting bodies. Rain itself may not be the cue. Often it is the pause after rain, when the air cools and humidity peaks, that invites mushrooms upward. To walk through the woods after a cold snap is to witness a quiet festival. Caps pushing through moss stipes thick with moisture, fairy rings brightening overnight. It feels spontaneous, but it is choreography. Freeze-tolerant species mushrooms of winter. Not all fungi fear frost. Some mushrooms fruit even as snow falls, their flesh resistant to freezing temperatures. Velvet foot, Flammulina velutypes, grows on logs. During winter thaws, its caps glossy and golden against the cold bark. Its cells contain antifreeze proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming. In the boreal forests, snowbanks morels fruit beside melting drifts, using the cold as a timing mechanism, knowing in whatever fungal way knowing happens that fewer competitors awaken in freezing weather. Even in the dead of winter, the fungal kingdom continues its slow, unstoppable work. Fairy rings, older than memory. Earlier we walked through the enchantment of fairy rings, but many rings are not just beautiful, they are ancient. Some rings in Europe may be over 700 years old, predating the farmhouses, even the villages that surround them. A ring can persist because its mycelium grows outward in a perfect circle year after year, while the interior ages, collapses and recycles itself into soil. To stand inside such a ring is to stand in the center of centuries. The ground beneath you has been shaped by a single organism living longer than kingdoms, longer than dynasties, perhaps longer than written records in the region. A ring is not a moment. It is a timeline, living lanterns in the night. On the darkest nights before electricity, people sometimes traveled forests with living light. Several species of fungi glow faintly bioluminescent wood decay fungi such as Armillaria, Panellus, Stypticus, and Omphalotus. The glow is called foxfire, a cold, steady light greenish like the memory of a firefly. Historical accounts describe hunters using glowing logs as markers on moonless trails, sailors keeping bits of luminous wood in their cabins, children gathering faintly glowing bark as makeshift lanterns. To hold a piece of glowing fungus is to cradle part of an ancient chemical conversation light, created not by flame but by enzymes, oxygen, and luciferin, just like fireflies, but softer, cooler, more patient. Even now, if you walk into a forest after rain and look closely at rotting logs, you may see subtle constellations, a quiet light pulsing from the past. The pulse. Beneath the world. Mushroom time is not human time. It does not rush. It does not obey calendars. It does not repeat itself cleanly. Some mushrooms rise once a year, some every few years, some in cycles we still cannot predict. Their rhythms depend on dew and drought cold fronts and moonless humidity, the age of wood, the chemical whispers of underground neighbours, and the ancient patience of the mycelium that waits for its moment. And when they finally appear after years of stillness or just one perfect night, they remind you of something deep and quiet. The world is alive not only in motion and growth but in waiting, not only in light but in darkness, not only in cycles you can see but in cycles too slow for human eyes. In that patience lies a kind of wisdom, a reminder that life unfolds at many speeds, and some of the most enduring rhythms belong to the quiet kingdom beneath your feet. Slow down for a moment and imagine the forest floor not as brown and green, but as a painter's palette, scattered with pigments that seem too bold, too strange, too deliberate to be accidents. Fungi do not limit themselves to the muted tones of bark and soil. They announce themselves, disguise themselves, warn, attract, confuse and delight with colours so vivid and improbable that when you first encounter them, you may feel as though you've stepped into a dream painted by nature's most eccentric artist. The fungal kingdom is a kingdom of colours, some soft, some violent, some glowing faintly in the twilight. Let's walk through this gallery. Red as a warning fly, Agaric's royal costume, few mushrooms are as instantly recognisable or as deeply woven into human imagination as the fly Agaric Amanita muscaria. Its brilliant red cap dotted with white patches feels less like a natural organism and more like an emblem, a flag, a symbol. It appears in fairy tales, old woodcuts, religious art, children's books and folklore around the world. Reindeer nibble it, shamans revered it. And for humans, that red and white pattern has long whispered caution. Its pigments, betaxanthins and muscimol precursors give it its iconic look. The red surface can appear glossy and rain matte in dryness, almost lacquered at sunset. The white warts are remnants of a protective veil that once wrapped it like an egg. The message is ancient and clear, do not eat me casually, and yet it is beautiful enough to feel supernatural. The deep purples and shadow blacks. Some mushrooms choose the opposite strategy, they wear the colours of twilight. Deep purples like spilled ink, velvety blacks that absorb light, dark wine-coloured caps that look like bruises on the forest floor. Species like the violet Court Cortinarius violaceus wear a richness so unexpected that encountering one feels like meeting an aristocrat of decay. Their colour serves no obvious defensive purpose. Perhaps it shields them from UV light. Perhaps it is mere biochemical flourish. And then there are the nearly black mushrooms' inky caps, coal-like crusts, soot-coloured funnels. They blend into shadow as though they wish to be overlooked by all but the most attentive passerby. Blue, as surprise mushrooms that bleed indigo. If red and black are dramatic, then the indigo milk cap is pure astonishment. When you slice into its flesh or snap its gills, it bleeds a thick blue latex, a surreal ocean-deep indigo that drips like ink from a broken pen. The colour slowly shifts when exposed to air, fading into greenish hues like oxidizing copper. Other mushrooms bruise blue when handle bullets whose flesh turns brilliant turquoise or navy where it's cut. This bruising is a chemical reaction, a cascade of oxidation triggered by exposure to the air. Some blue reactions happen in seconds, others unfold slowly, darkening like storm clouds. To see a mushroom turn blue in your hand is to witness molecular storytelling, a reminder that fungi are chemical laboratories wrapped in living skin. Gold as sunlight, chanterelles and other forest lanterns. Then there are chanterelles which seem to hold sunlight in their folds, golden apricot-coloured, sometimes glowing softly, even under dense shade. Their ridges run in smooth ripples, catching light like the gills of a fish or the inside of a seashell. In a darkened forest, their warm colour acts as a beacon, subtle yet unmistakable. Some yellow fungi glow so brightly they seem lit from within sulphur tufts, golden foliatas, lemony wax caps. Others shimmer with metallic tones, bronze caps, coppery sheens, silvery greys. Under rain, these colours deepen until the forest looks lacquered in resin, white as ghosts, luminescent, or pale as bone. Not all beauty is vivid. Some mushrooms are striking precisely because they seem drained of colour. There are fungi so pale they resemble ghosts' translucent waxy caps. White amanitas, the delicate porcelain fungus that glows faintly on fallen beach logs. Mica heterotrophic plants like ghost pipes lurking nearby, adding to the illusion. In the beam of a flashlight, these mushrooms appear almost skeletal, fragile, pure, unworldly. Their lack of pigment may protect them from heat or reflect excess sunlight, but to the human eye they feel like emissaries from another realm. When mushrooms change colour. The drama of bruising. Many mushrooms do not keep the same colour when touched or cut. Their flesh shifts in minutes, white to yellow, yellow to brown, brown to blue, blue to black. This bruising is not decay but chemistry, a mixture of enzymes, phenolic compounds and oxygen creating temporary art. Mycologists often use bruising reactions as identification tools, like reading a hidden signature. A sliced barlette that turns sapphire in your hand feels alive in a way that surprises you. The mushroom reacts. It records your touch and colour, the hidden rainbow's spore prints. Even mushrooms that look plain on the outside often reveal secret colours through their spores. When a cap is placed on paper overnight, it leaves behind a spore print, a delicate mandala of fine powder. These prints come in a spectrum: pure white, creamy yellow, rust red, chocolate brown, olive green, smoky purple brown, ink black. The colour of a spore print can distinguish deadly mushrooms from edible ones, twins from imposters, mysteries from certainties. Each spore print is like a coded message from the fungus, a signature written in dust. A kingdom painted in possibility. Fungal colours are not decoration. They are chemistry, warning, camouflage, attraction, reaction, light protection, UV signalling, heat regulation. And sometimes they are simply evolutionary artistry, an exuberant expression of the diverse forms life can take. A red cap warns, a blue bruise surprises, a golden chanterelle invites, a white ghost glows in darkness, a purple core hides in shadow, a spore print leaves a secret rainbow on paper. The forest, when you know how to look, is anything but brown and green. It is a gallery of colours painted by a kingdom that hides in plain sight and reveals itself brilliantly only when the moment is right. If mushrooms are the showy ambassadors of the fungal kingdom, the flags, the fireworks, then the real fungal world is everything you almost never see. It lives in the air around you, on your skin, in your home, on your food, in the soil beneath your feet. It is a constant, invisible presence, so omnipresent that you move through clouds of it every day without noticing. Compared to these unseen communities, mushrooms are statistical outliers. The true fungal majority is microscopic, quiet, and everywhere. In the air, spores drift in endless numbers. On bread, fuzzy colonies appear with patient inevitability. In fruit juice yeasts quietly rearrange molecules. Fungal life surrounds you not as danger, not as menace, but as part of the ordinary breathing world. Let's step into this invisible kingdom, the constant rain of spores. At every moment you're walking through a gentle shower of spores so fine they might as well be dust motes. They rise from soil, from mushrooms, from decaying leaves, from houseplants, from damp wood, from unnoticed corners of your home. They flow into the atmosphere by the billions, wafted upward by heat currents, churned by wind carried far above clouds. Scientists who have sampled the air with filters and microscopes find that spore concentrations can reach thousands per cubic meter in calm weather, and tens of thousands during peak mushroom seasons. Even indoor air, no matter how carefully cleaned, carries spores. You inhale them. They settle on your clothes. They drift onto your pillow as you sleep. And almost all of them are harmless tiny packets of dormant potential, waiting for the right environment to wake. To live on Earth is to breathe with fungi, molds, the soft cities. You didn't know you loved or hated molds are the engineers of damp, nutrient-rich environments. They don't build mushrooms. They form networks, soft, fuzzy, colourful colonies that expand across surfaces like tiny spreading cities. You know them well, the green bloom on forgotten bread, the white fluff on old strawberries, the grey fuzz inside damp walls, the blue veins in cheese. They are not one species, but many Penicillium aspergillus, Rhizopus cladosporium, thousands more, each with its own preferred humidity temperature and food source. Moulds are incredibly fast growers. Give them moisture and a handful of carbohydrates, and they will colonize a surface overnight, spreading hyphae like exploratory scouts. They digest externally, releasing enzymes into the world and absorbing the nutrients they release. They are recyclers, opportunists, warnings, and sometimes allies. Allies, yes. The mould. Penicillium chrysogenum gave us penicillin, the antibiotic that changed modern medicine. Other moulds are responsible for beloved cheeses, Roquefort, Camembert, Gorgonzola, whose flavours depend on fungal chemistry. Moulds are part of your home whether you see them or not. A house without mould spores in the air is as impossible as an ocean without salt. Yeasts. The single cells that changed civilization. Now shrink your perspective even further into the realm of yeasts. Fungi so small they exist as individual cells. They do not grow hyphae. They do not build colonies like green fuzz. Instead, they reproduce by budding, dividing cleanly, quietly, and visibly. Yet these microscopic organisms have shaped human history. The yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, ferments sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide, a trick that humans have used for millennia to bake bread, brew beer, and ferment wine. Each bubble in rising dough is a yeast's breath. Each sip of beer is the result of a yeast cell splitting sugar into simpler molecules. Even the fizz in champagne is the monument of yeast metabolism. Other yeasts live on your skin, in your mouth, in your gut, harmless residents, in a complex microbial neighbourhood. Yeasts are invisible companions woven into the fabric of your daily life. Their evolutionary genius, breaking down sugars in low-oxygen environments, became one of humanity's oldest technologies. Invisible communities, visible effects. Though the fungal majority is too small to see its influence, is enormous. Soil health. Invisible fungi bind soil particles, form microaggregates, regulate moisture, decompose organic matter, and create habitats for bacteria. Without these microscopic workers, soil would collapse into dust or mud, unable to hold nutrients or support plants. Allergies. Many airborne spores come from moulds rather than mushrooms. People with allergies often react not to pollen alone, but to fungal spores that surge during damp weather or leaf decay. Food spoilage. When fruit softens, bread spots, or vegetables collapse into slime, fungi are often the first responders, speeding biodegradation with ruthless efficiency. They help prevent food waste in nature, even as they occasionally frustrate human kitchens. Indoor air ecology. Every home has a microbial signature shaped by its inhabitants, its location, its ventilation, and yes, its fungi. This isn't contamination. It's normal, healthy, part of the atmospheric ecosystem that surrounds all living spaces. The quiet background of fungal life. The beauty of the fungal kingdom is that it operates on two levels: the dramatic level of mushrooms, colours, architecture, and the quiet level of spores, moulds, and yeasts, the visible and the invisible, the show and the infrastructure. Microscopic fungi remind you that life's greatest transformations often happen out of sight: leaves breaking down, bread rising, wine fermenting, soil forming, air circulating, ecosystems breathing. You live in a world upheld by organisms you rarely notice. And while a mushroom can appear overnight like a visitor from another realm, moulds and yeasts work steadily in the background, keeping the planet's processes running, not with spectacle but with persistence. The fungal kingdom is vast beyond imagination. Most of it is too small to see, too quiet to hear, too patient to rush. But once you begin to look closely, you realize the invisible majority has always been with you. In your air, on your food, in your soil, in your home, in your breath. And the world would not function without them. Long before we were farmers, long before we domesticated grains or carved fields into the earth, humans were already gathering mushrooms. Our relationship with fungi is older than agriculture, older than writing, older than many civilizations whose ruins now crumble back into the soil that fungi patiently reclaim. We have eaten them, feared them, worshipped them, carried them across mountains, used them as medicine, and woven them into stories that outlast dynasties. To explore our history with fungi is to walk backward into the human story itself through deep time across continents, into the hands of ancestors who learned which mushrooms nourished and which ones punished. Ötzi and the first evidence mushrooms of survival. One of the oldest human-fungi collaborations was discovered frozen in ice. Ötzi the Iceman, a 5,300-year-old mummy found in the Alps, carried fungi with him, not as food but as tools and medicine. He had birch polypore fungus used as an antimicrobial and possibly as a dewormer. Tinder fungus, Fomes fomentarius, used to carry embers long distances. These were not casual items, they were survival gear. They show that even in prehistory, humans understood fungi as medicine, fire technology, and protection. Our species has been working with mushrooms for at least 5 millennia, likely far longer. Traditional knowledge, human cultures and Earth's quiet teachers. Across the world, traditional communities develop deep mushroom knowledge, sometimes entire vocabularies harvesting rituals and stories tied to fungal seasons. In Siberia, shamans used fly agaric in ceremonial contexts. In Mesoamerica, sacred mushrooms played roles in spiritual rites for centuries. In Japan, matsutake hunting became a respected autumn tradition. In Eastern Europe, entire families forage each year, passing fungal lore across generations. In Mexico, huitlacoche, the corn fungus, became a prized delicacy with a flavor like smoky truffle. These traditions are not just about food, they carry geography, ecology, family memory. In mushroom cultures, knowing where a porcini grows is a kind of inheritance. The delicacy's food's worth. Crossing the world, for some fungi have become global treasures. Matsutake spicy, resinous, crisp, in aroma rare, difficult to cultivate, tied to pine forests that resist human interference. Matsutake is a gift from wild landscapes, a reminder that not all foods can be industrialized. Morels, honeycombed hollow, deliciously nutty. They rise after fires, after snowmelt in secret forest patches. Their season is short, their flavor unmistakable. Huitlacoche, the corn truffle of Mexico, transforming kernels into smoky, earthy, velvety folds. A fungus that elevated a plant disease into a national dish. And then, of course, truffles. The truffle economy, desire. Buried in soil. Truffles are the crown jewels of fungal cuisine, hidden, aromatic, mysterious. They do not fruit above ground. They are found by skill, intuition, and the noses of trained dogs. Each year, hunters comb ancient oak groves before dawn. They whisper encouragement to their dogs. They carry small spades and baskets, and sometimes, when fortune aligns, they uncover a lump worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. The truffle market moves globally. French Périgord truffles, Italian white Alba truffles, Spanish black truffles, Chinese desert truffles, Australian and American orchards beginning to join the story. Aromatic molecules, complex, intoxicating fuel, an economy that crosses continents. Truffles turn chefs into pilgrims and forests into treasure maps. The modern forager curiosity meets caution. Today, mushroom foraging has undergone a resurgence. People wander forests with baskets and field guides, learning to read the language of caps, gills, stems, colors, smells, habitats. For many, it becomes meditative, an excuse to walk slowly, to observe, to rediscover nature's details. And yet, foraging carries one unbreakable rule. Never eat a mushroom unless you are absolutely sure. Almost sure does not count. Probably fine does not count, because the fungal kingdom contains astonishing flavors and deadly imitations. A false morel can kill. A destroying angel can be mistaken for an edible puffball. A death cap can resemble a common field mushroom. Foragers learn the discipline of humility. They learn to say, "I don't know this species," and put it back. This humility is part of the relationship. The forest gives, but only if you listen carefully. From prehistory to now, a shared journey, fungi have accompanied us across eras, helping preserve fire, healing infections, enriching food, creating fermented drinks, inspiring myths, guiding scientific breakthroughs, shaping ecological understanding, and in return we have carried fungi in our baskets, in our clothing, in our stories, and now in our laboratories and cuisines. The partnership is ancient, fragile, ongoing. When you slice a morel, inhale the aroma of a truffle, watch bread rise, or find a bright chanterelle hidden beneath leaves, you are taking part in a relationship older than cities, older than agriculture, older than many human cultures combined. Our history with fungi is not a footnote. It is a thread running through every era of the human story, quiet, essential, delicious, dangerous, miraculous. A bond written not in words but in spores and soil, and the hunger that binds us to the living world. If wild mushrooms are the mysterious gifts of rain, and seasoned cultivated mushrooms are the opposite, predictable, dependable coaxed from darkness on our schedule. But this partnership between humans and fungi is not ancient like grain agriculture. It's surprisingly young, barely a few centuries old, and even now it retains an air of improvisation. To cultivate fungi is to collaborate with organisms that do not bend easily to human planning, but when they do cooperate, the results feel almost alchemical food from waste nourishment, from scraps protein from what would otherwise rot. Our journey into mushroom farming begins appropriately underground. French caves and the birth of the button mushroom. In the 1600s, Parisian gardeners noticed something peculiar. White mushrooms sometimes sprouted spontaneously from manure heaps kept for melon cultivation. The gardeners began intentionally burying chunks of mushroom-bearing compost seeding their piles, in hopes of encouraging more. But the breakthrough came in the 1700s, when an observant horticulturist realized that abandoned limestone caves outside Paris offered ideal growing conditions, stable cool temperatures, steady humidity, natural darkness, and minimal wind. And so the first true mushroom farms were born. In these cool cave corridors, the modern button mushroom Agaricus bisporus was domesticated. Workers hauled in composted manure, spread it into long beds, and inoculated it with fungal spawn. Over weeks, mushrooms emerged in tidy waves that could be harvested repeatedly. These French cave farms supplied restaurants and markets for centuries, setting the template for every button mushroom you see in grocery stores today. White uniform, familiar, born of darkness. Behind every neat supermarket mushroom lies a lineage that began in subterranean Paris. Shiitake logs. Farming with wood and patience. Across the world in East Asia, a different tradition evolved. For nearly 1,000 years, people in Japan, China and Korea have grown shiitake mushrooms not in compost, but on logs, freshly cut hardwood, usually oak or chestnut. The process is ancient, elegant and surprisingly simple. Cut healthy logs in winter or early spring. Drill small holes along the bark. Insert plugs of shiitake spawn bits of mycelium on wooden dowels. Seal with wax to protect from pests. Stack the logs in a shady forest corner. Wait. The waiting can take 1 to 2 years depending on temperature and moisture, as the mycelium slowly colonizes the wood. Then after a heavy rain or a sudden soak, shiitake mushrooms erupt from the logs in thick, savory clusters, crinkled brown caps with white-edged gills smelling of forest and smoke. A single log can fruit for 5 to 7 years. This style of mushroom farming feels less like agriculture and more like long-term conversation with wood, rain and time. It is slow, it is patient, it is resilient. Backyard growers still practice it around the world, an ancient method flourishing quietly in modern hands. Oyster mushrooms, the alchemists of waste. If button mushrooms came from caves and shiitake from logs, then oyster mushrooms discovered a more radical niche. They grow on almost anything. Straw sawdust, cardboard cotton rags, corn cobs, banana leaves, shredded paper coffee grounds. The oyster mushroom loves them all. It's a master decomposer, a fungal opportunist capable of colonizing waste that other organisms ignore. In kitchens and urban farms, people now use oyster mushrooms to turn spent coffee grounds into food brew coffee. Collect the grounds, mix with oyster mushroom spawn, keep moist and dark for a few weeks. Watch as snowy white mycelium devours the grounds. Wait for bright, frilled clusters of oyster mushrooms to bloom. It is astonishingly efficient. The fungus turns what was destined for the trash into protein-rich, flavorful food with almost no energy input. In this way, mushrooms become ambassadors of the circular economy. Waste becomes substrate. Substrate becomes food. Food scraps become compost. Compost becomes soil. Soil supports plants. Plants produce new waste. Fungi close the loop. Some modern cultivators even grow mushrooms on cardboard soaked in water. The fibers soften, the mycelium threads through them like lightning, and suddenly a useless box becomes a miniature farm. The oyster mushroom doesn't care about prestige. It cares about opportunity. And opportunity is everywhere. The future of sustainable agriculture mushrooms are showing us a different way to think about farming. One that doesn't compete with plants or require large fields or consume gallons of water. Instead, they thrive in overlooked spaces under benches, in basements, in converted shipping containers, in vertical farms, in community centers, in tiny home kits on windowsills. Wherever there is organic matter, there is potential. Fungi offer protein production with almost zero land footprint, the ability to upcycle agricultural waste, extremely low water use, carbon-efficient food with minimal emissions, biodegradable packaging alternatives, mycelium foam, soil restoration through spent substrate. In an era of climate uncertainty, mushrooms represent a quiet but profound possibility agriculture, without the burden of ploughing fields, draining rivers, or clearing forests. They make food from scraps. They make abundance from leftovers. They turn our waste into nourishment. From French caves to backyard logs to coffee shop trash bins, mushroom farming tells a story of partnership, humans learning to collaborate with the hidden kingdom beneath our feet. It is a story of patience, resourcefulness, and reinvention. A story of turning darkness into nourishment. A story of seeing potential in what others overlook. And as more people discover the joy of growing mushrooms at home, whether in the forest, in the garage, or in a simple cardboard box, the ancient partnership deepens. Food grown from shadows, sustenance made from waste. A quiet, sustainable agriculture rising from the remarkable creativity of fungi. For all their gentleness, all their quiet cooperation, all their recycling and partnership, and hidden beauty, fungi are not simple allies. They are not arranged into neat categories of good and bad any more than rain or wind or wolves are. The fungal kingdom is ancient, opportunistic, and astonishingly adaptable, and the same chemistry that lets fungi digest logs or heal soil can also tear through living plants, animals, and even human bodies. When fungi fight back, they can change landscapes, they can erase forests, they can extinguish species, they can bring cities to their knees. This is the darker side of a kingdom we've grown comfortable loving. Trees that fall, silent Dutch, elm disease, and the chestnut blight. Imagine walking through an American town in 1900. Streets lined with towering American elms, the cathedral trees, their branches arching overhead like vaulted ceilings. Or imagine the Appalachian forests where American chestnuts grew so thick and abundant that people said a squirrel could travel from Georgia to Maine without ever touching the ground. Today those worlds are gone. Dutch elm disease caused by Ophiostoma fungi carried by bark beetles spread across continents in the 20th century. Once inside a tree, the fungus clogs its vascular system, cutting off water flow. Leaves wilt. Branches die. Whole avenues turned into corridors of skeleton trees. Entire city canopies collapsed in slow motion. The chestnut blighter fungus from East Asia did something similar. Cryphonectria parasitica arrived around 1904 and moved like a ghost through the eastern United States. It killed an estimated 4 billion trees, a collapse so enormous that it reshaped rural economies, wildlife habitats, and Appalachian culture itself. Both diseases remind us a forest is resilient, but it is not invincible. A single fungal pathogen can alter an entire continent. The silent crises and wildlife fungi don't just affect plants. In the last few decades, they have become one of the greatest threats to animal life, especially species that never evolved defenses against rapid globalization. Chytrid fungus, a catastrophe in slow motion. Somewhere in the mid-20th century, an amphibian fungus called Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis, BD for short, began spreading across the world. No one noticed at first. Frogs die quietly. Salamanders vanish without ceremony. But soon patterns emerged, frogs disappearing from entire mountain ranges. Once common species reduced to ghost stories. Dozens of extinctions in just a few decades. Chytrid fungus attacks amphibian skin, disrupting their ability to regulate water, and electrolytes functions essential to their survival. Death can come quickly or invisibly, but it always comes without much warning. Scientists now believe chytrid is responsible for the greatest vertebrate disease-driven loss in recorded history. An entire branch of the tree of life is withering because of a fungus smaller than a grain of dust. White nose syndrome, winter, tragedy in caves. In North America, another fungal pathogen, Pseudogymnoascus destructans, spreads through bat colonies during winter hibernation. It grows in cold tunnels, covering bats' noses and wings with white fuzz. The fungus wakes the bats repeatedly during hibernation, forcing them to burn precious fat reserves. Many starve before spring. Since its discovery in 2006, millions of bats have died. Some species have declined by more than 9% in affected regions. The ecological consequences are enormous. Bats are key insect controllers, pollinators, and seed dispersers. A fungus in a cave can ripple through farmland, forests, and cities. When fungi reach us, the human battleground. Humans too have long histories with fungal disease, some mild, some deadly. Everyday troubles, athlete's foot, ringworm, yeast infections. These conditions are not dangerous, but they are stubborn. They remind us that fungi are always near our skin, waiting for warmth, moisture, and small vulnerabilities. The dangerous few systemic fungal infections. Inside healthy bodies, most fungi are held at bay. But in people with weakened immune systems, patients undergoing chemotherapy, organ transplants, steroid treatments, or battling chronic disease, some fungi can become lethal foes. Aspergillus spores inhaled from dust, Cryptococcus in soil or bird droppings, Candida auris, a hospital-associated yeast with alarming drug resistance. Systemic fungal infections kill over 1 million people each year, a number that receives far less attention than bacterial or viral disease. The danger isn't their aggression, it's their subtlety. Fungi grow slowly, quietly, making them hard to detect and harder to treat. And unlike bacteria, fungi are eukaryotes' biological cousins to humans. That similarity makes it difficult to design drugs that harm them without harming us. Ecosystems balanced on a knife edge. Why do some fungi become devastating pathogens while others remain harmless or beneficial? Often the answer lies in disruption. Global trade moves fungi faster than hosts can adapt. Climate change shifts temperature and moisture in ways that favor pathogens. Habitat loss forces species into contact that never would have met in wild conditions. Stress, heat, drought, pollution weakens immune systems of plants and animals. Pathogenic fungi aren't villains, they're opportunists in a world humans keep reshuffling. And yet, despite the tragedies they cause, fungal pathogens also reveal something important. Ecosystems rely on balance. When balance breaks, fungi respond first, not maliciously but rapidly, filling ecological voids, exploiting weakness, reshaping the living world with startling efficiency. The same kingdom that recycles forests can also erase them. The same threads that connect roots in partnership can carry disease between them. The same spores that feed soil can spread catastrophe. Fungi do not take sides, they simply respond. And when they respond, the world changes, not always in ways we expect, but in ways we cannot ignore. You don't normally think of the forest as a pharmacy or a weapons laboratory, but fungi have been both for millions of years long, before humans ever learned to grind powders or boil tinctures or name the things that save us and the things that kill us. Deep inside their cells, fungi run chemical workshops unlike anything else on Earth. They build molecules the way spiders spin silk quietly, efficiently, intricately. Some of these molecules are gentle, some are transformative, some are lethal on a scale that feels almost mythic. And the paradox is this: the same kingdom that gave us the first antibiotics also created the most dangerous natural poisons found on land. The same kingdom that heals our infections can also dissolve our organs. The same kingdom that brings us bread, beer, and cheese can open the doors of perception, or close the door on life entirely. Tonight you walk into the silent hall of the fungal chemists, the beautiful deadly elegance of amatoxins. If you saw a death cap mushroom growing in a meadow, smooth greenish cap, white gills, innocent stance, you might not look twice. It does not advertise danger. It does not glow a threatening red like storybook toadstools. And yet inside this mild, unassuming mushroom is one of the most efficient poisons ever evolved, amatoxins. These tiny molecules slip into the body and sabotage a fundamental part of life, the enzyme that copies DNA into RNA. Without that process, cells cannot make proteins. Cells cannot repair themselves. Cells simply fail. The cruelest part is the delay. Someone may eat a death cap thinking it is an edible look-alike. For half a day, maybe a full day, they feel fine. Then suddenly nausea and vomiting hit hard, but by then the damage has already begun. The liver overwhelmed, the kidneys struggling, internal systems collapsing like a line of dominoes hidden beneath skin. There is often a brief period of recovery, a deceptive calm where symptoms fade and hope returns. But inside, the organs continue slipping toward failure. By the time true symptoms appear, treatment becomes a race against time one modern medicine often loses. Destroying angels, their ghost white cousins, carry the same quiet violence. Just one mushroom is enough to end a life. Fungi make these molecules to keep insects and animals from eating them, not to target humans. But the chemistry doesn't discriminate. The molecule does its work either way. The slow killers. Cumulative toxins and heavy metals. Not all fungal toxins shout. Some whisper. A mushroom might not be deadly today, it might not even make someone sick, but with repeated meals its toxins build up molecule by molecule until the body begins to show the cost. False morels contain gyrometrin, which breaks down into compounds that damage the liver, and may increase cancer risk. Other mushrooms act like sponges, pulling cadmium, mercury, lead, and other heavy metals from the soil. In polluted areas, even edible mushrooms can quietly gather toxins in their tissues. A forager may harvest them for years, unaware of the invisible accumulation. With fungi, the danger is not always immediate. Sometimes it is patient, subtle, incremental, like the fungi themselves, the medicines that changed everything. But the fungal kingdom's chemistry is not defined by danger. Some of its molecules have saved far more lives than its poisons have taken. In 1928, Alexander Fleming noticed a simple mold, penicillium-killing bacteria, on a forgotten petri dish. From that moment came penicillin, the first true antibiotic. Before penicillin, a small cut could kill. Childbirth infections were common. Pneumonia swept through populations like a winter wind. Survival was often luck. After penicillin, everything changed. Life expectancy rose. Simple injuries became survivable. Modern surgery became possible, and penicillin was only the beginning. Statins, the most widely used cholesterol-lowering drugs, came from fungal metabolites. Cyclosporine, the drug that makes organ transplantation feasible, was born from a soil fungus discovered in Norway. Anti-cancer compounds, antiviral agents, immunosuppressants. Fungi produce an entire library of chemical weapons, many of which we have repurposed as cures. It's not an accident. Fungi evolved these molecules to compete, to defend themselves, to carve out niches in the microbial battleground of soil and decay. We simply learned to borrow their brilliance. Chemistry that changes the mind. There is another branch of the fungal laboratory, one that cultures not death, not healing, but experience itself. Psychoactive mushrooms containing psilocybin have been used ceremonially for thousands of years in parts of Mesoamerica. Their effects are not poison, they do not physically damage organs, but they profoundly alter perception, mood, memory, and the sense of self. For decades, these mushrooms were framed only as drugs of abuse, but now quietly and carefully science is revisiting them. Clinical trials suggest psilocybin-assisted therapy may help with treatment-resistant depression, end-of-life anxiety, PTSD, addiction, not because the mushroom provides an escape, but because it appears to create a window in the mind, a reset period, where rigid patterns of thought loosen and new ones can be formed under guidance. The same fungus that might once have been gathered in a ritual circle is now being examined with MRI machines and molecular models. And then there is Amanita muscaria, a fly agaric of fairy tales, whose psychoactive compounds produce delirium, dreams, distortions of time and space. Unpredictable, neither purely medicinal nor purely dangerous, it stands as a reminder that fungal chemistry follows its own ancient logic, a kingdom that cuts both ways. To study fungal chemistry is to confront a strange truth. Fungi are not trying to help us. They are not trying to harm us. They do not brew penicillin for our wounds. They do not craft amatoxins for our downfall. They make molecules because life demands competition and defense and creativity in the dark soil. We step into that chemistry by accident, sometimes blessed, sometimes cursed. The fungal kingdom contains toxins that can destroy the liver, molecules that allow organ transplants, compounds that illuminate consciousness, chemicals that shaped modern medicine, poisons that shaped human caution, cures that shaped human survival. In a single spore there is a quiet potential for healing or harm. In a single mushroom there is chemistry powerful enough to end a life or to save it. The wizardry belongs to the fungi. How we use it or misuse it is up to us. If you kneel beside a boulder in a forest, or run your fingers along an ancient wall, or pause on a mountain ridge where nothing else seems alive, you will often see a thin crust, a soft tuft, a delicate branching shape clinging stubbornly to stone. It doesn't look like much, some dusty grey patches, maybe a splash of orange or a frayed pale green tuft trembling in the wind. But these quiet forms are lichens, part fungus, part alga, part something more than either could ever be alone. You're looking at the oldest kind of cooperation on land. A partnership so intimate that the partners blend into a new being, what some scientists call a composite organism, and others simply call a miracle of endurance. A marriage of survival, fungus, plural. Alga. A lichen is not one organism. It is two, sometimes three entwined, a fungus which builds the body sheets, cups, tufts, fronds, filaments. An alga or cyanobacterium which performs photosynthesis, turning sunlight, air and water into sugars. The fungus shelters the alga from harsh sun and desiccation, creating tiny chambers where photosynthetic cells can live safely. The alga provides the food the fungus cannot make for itself. Together they become something neither could imagine alone, a self-contained solar-powered survival machine capable of living where almost nothing else can. They creep over bare rock, they cling to windswept cliffs, they survive deserts, tundra, nuclear test sites, even the vacuum of space. The very first life forms to colonize naked stone were almost certainly lichen-like partnerships. They are pioneers, terraformers, slow architects of soil. Life at 1 millimeter per decade. Lichens measure time at a different speed. A tree might grow a foot in a year. A mushroom might appear and vanish in days. A lichen, it might grow 1 millimeter in 10 years. This slow pace is not a flaw, it is strategy. By growing slowly, lichens avoid exhausting the fragile foothold they carve from the rock. Each decade, a few more grains loosen beneath them. Each century, a thin layer of organic dust gathers. Each 1,000 years, enough soil forms for mosses, grasses, perhaps even small shrubs to take root. Where mountains seem eternal and static, lichens are quietly at work, sculpting the future one invisible grain at a time. A boulder covered in lichens is not just decorated, it is being transformed. Survival in the harshest places on Earth. Lichens have superpowers. They can dry out completely, becoming brittle husks, then rehydrate and resume photosynthesis within minutes. They can endure freezing temperatures that shatter other organisms. They can survive heat that would cook most plants. They can sit dormant in drought for years. They can tolerate brutal ultraviolet radiation. They were among the very few organisms to survive unprotected exposure to space in experiments by the European Space Agency. Most life needs comfort. Lichens need only possibility. Wherever the bare minimum exists, light a foothold, and occasional moisture lichens begin to work. They are the quiet frontier dwellers of our planet, reindeer lichens feeding the north. In Arctic and subarctic regions, lichens are not just pioneers, they are providers. Reindeer lichens form pale branching mats that blanket tundra landscapes like whisper-soft coral reefs on land. They are among the few reliable food sources during winter, when nearly everything else is locked under snow or dead from cold. For reindeer and caribou, lichens provide critical calories. They digest slowly, releasing energy steadily. Herd migrations often trace the presence of these lichen fields. For northern indigenous peoples, reindeer or caribou depend on the lichens, and the people depend on the herds. It is a triangle of life drawn across frozen land. These lichens grow painfully slowly. Overgrazing can erase decades in a single season. So cultures that live close to them learn patience, move the herds, let the lichens recover, respect the timescale of the tundra, nature's fragile dyes and old world colors. For centuries, humans have used certain lichens for dyes, soft purples, reds, browns, and golds, extracted through long, careful processes. Scottish crofters used lichens to colour wool in traditional Harris tweed. Mediterranean dyers fermented specific lichens to make rich purples prized before synthetic dyes existed. Indigenous craftspeople in many regions used lichen pigments for textiles and decoration. The colours are earthy, subtle, organic, alive. But they come at a cost. Lichen dyes require large amounts of material, and lichens grow too slowly to sustain over-harvesting. Today, dyed with lichens is a luxury best approached with reverence and restraint. These organisms are not easily replaced. The first soil makers. Before forests stood tall, before grasslands spread, before mosses and ferns cooled, the land lichens were already there. Their role in soil formation is profound. Their acids seep into rock, breaking it down grain by grain. Their dead tissues accumulate as the first organic matter. Their presence traps moisture and creates microhabitats. In landscapes blasted by glaciers or volcanic eruptions, lichens are among the earliest returners, beginning the cycle of life anew. You walk on soil every day, but that soil was written slowly by partnerships older than plants, sentinels of the air lichens as pollution indicators. Because lichens absorb everything directly from the air, moisture, nutrients, dust, they're exquisitely sensitive to pollution. Sulfur dioxide kills them. Heavy metals accumulate in their tissues. Nitrogen pollution can cause some species to vanish and others to bloom unnaturally. In cities during the height of industrial pollution, lichens disappeared from entire regions. When clean air regulations were enacted, lichens slowly returned one patch on one tree at a time, quiet proof that the air was healing. Ecologists read lichens the way doctors read vital signs. A healthy forest filled with diverse lichens means the atmosphere is clean. A forest stripped of them means something is wrong. They are living monitors, not alarms that blare but lights that fade. The quiet mystery of composite life. To understand lichens is to rethink what it means to be alive. They are not individuals. They are not colonies. They are agreements lasting flexible, mutually beneficial bargains held together by need and possibility. If fungi show us anything, it is that life is rarely simple, and lichens show us that survival often depends on relationships so deep that the boundaries between partners begin to blur. You can stand on a windswept cliff surrounded by nothing but stone and sky, and under your fingertips feel the fragile crust of lichens. They teach a small, humbling truth. Life does not always grow fast. Sometimes it grows patiently, sometimes it grows together, sometimes it grows where no life should be able to grow at all. You lie there now in the quiet dark, the day loosening its grip on your thoughts, and as your breath slows, something subtle begins to happen, not in your room, not in your mind, but in the way the world around you rearranges itself in memory. You start to sense the hidden kingdom beneath everything you've ever walked upon. The soft soil, the forest floor, the meadow after rain, all of it held together, stitched together, enlivened by threads so fine you could crumble them between your fingers, yet so ancient they whisper across continents. Tonight that kingdom feels closer. You can almost feel it breathing. A web beneath every step. You picture the ground beneath your feet, the last time you walked through a forest, the soft give of earth, the scent of leaves, the quiet presence of something alive under the surface. Now you know what was there, a billion white threads, quietly holding the world in place. Mycelium weaves beneath roots, beneath stones, beneath fallen logs. It enters dead leaves, breaks them apart, feeds the soil, feeds the trees, feeds the insects, feeds the next generation of life. You realize that every step you've ever taken outside was taken above a vast unseen network, older than animals, older than forests, older than almost anything you can name. A network that doesn't ask for attention. A network that just works. Slowly, patiently, faithfully, while storms rise, while mountains erode, while entire civilizations come and go. The kingdom you walk through, without seeing, you think of mushrooms now not as food or decoration or autumn curiosities, but as brief fleeting messages rising from a body that almost never shows itself. You think of spores drifting invisibly through every breath you take. You think of lichens clinging to stone, of truffles hiding underground, of fairy rings, writing slow circles in the grass. You think of the forests that could not exist without fungi, the crops that would fail without fungal roots, the medicines that came from forgotten molds, the soils that would collapse without decomposition, the carbon cycles that would break without fungal respiration. The world continues to exist because of quiet chemical wizards working in the shadows, digesting, connecting, recycling, healing. And sometimes when the balance falters, reminding us that power is not always gentle. The fungal kingdom is not loud. It is not boastful. It does not shine. But everything you love about the living world depends on it. A network that never sleeps. As your eyes begin to drift, imagine the forest at night, the true night deeper than electric lamps and human noise. Picture the trees as silhouettes against a pale sky. Picture the roots reaching down into the cool soil. Picture the threads of mycelium wrapped around them like delicate hands passing messages. Water here, sugar there, danger coming. Share, protect, grow. You can almost sense those messages traveling now, slow pulses in the dark like the breathing of the earth itself. Even as you lie still, the forest beneath you is busy. The networks continue their work. The partnerships continue their exchanges. The decomposers continue their slow, essential unraveling of the past. Life goes on in the quiet. Everything is still moving. You belong to this story. Too, somewhere inside you, your breath settles into a gentler rhythm. And with it comes a small understanding. You're not separate from this kingdom. You're part of the same cycles. You breathe what fungi help release. You eat what fungi help grow. You live in structures shaped by decay and renewal. You carry fungi on your skin in your home and your stories. The boundary between you and the rest of life grows softer in the dark. You are one piece into ancient tapestry woven from spores and roots, from storms and soil, from patient work done out of sight. You are held by this world even when you forget it, especially when you forget it. Let the forest keep working while you rest. So now here in this gentle moment, you give yourself permission to let go. The mycelial world beneath your thoughts will keep pulsing. The cycles will continue. The hidden kingdom will look after the night. You can rest. You can drift. You can allow the edges of the day to dissolve. Let curiosity stay awake, softly glowing at the edge of your awareness, while your body slips deeper, quieter into sleep. Close your eyes, breathe once more, and let the ancient threads beneath the world cradle you as you fade into the warm dark. Good night from the fungal kingdom.